I am Rachel, 34 years old, and until recently, the secret backbone of my entire family. My husband declared, I am sick of supporting you and our child. From now on, we each keep our own money. I happily agreed, until the first bill arrived and he realized I was the only reason his life had not fallen apart. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic partner who underestimated your worth. The balloons from Leo's 5th birthday party were still bobbing against the kitchen ceiling when my husband Jason decided to drop his bomb. I was standing at the granite island of our suburban Boston home, scraping dried frosting off a plate, exhausted, but smiling because my son had finally managed to say thank you to his friends. Leo has a speech delay and requires intensive therapy, something we had been navigating for 2 years. Jason marched into the kitchen smelling heavily of expensive scotch and the designer cologne he wore to his Wall Street investment firm. He did not ask if I needed help cleaning up the wrapping paper. He did not ask if Leo had a good time. Instead, he slammed a printed spreadsheet directly over my soapy sponge, the harsh sound echoing in the quiet kitchen. I looked down. The columns were highlighted in red and green, meticulously detailing every single household expense. Sign it, Jason demanded, his voice thick with unearned authority. Starting this month, we are splitting everything 50-50. The mortgage, the groceries, the utilities, and yes, that ridiculous speech therapy for Leo. I wiped my hands on a towel, staring at the man I had married. 50-50. You want to split 5-year-old Leo's medical bills? I am sick of carrying a dead-weight wife, Jason snapped, loosening his silk tie. I bust my back managing million-dollar portfolios while you sit at home in your yoga pants, typing on your laptop all day, pretending to have a business. You do not contribute anything real. You are a drain on my resources, Rachel. If you want to live under my roof, you pull your own weight. I am cutting you off. I am. He stood there, puffing out his chest, waiting for the breakdown. He expected me to cry, to beg, to remind him that my so-called laptop hobby was the only thing allowing me to stay home with our special needs son. But the tears never came. A strange, icy calm washed over me. I reached into the drawer, pulled out a black ink pen, and signed my name at the bottom of his spreadsheet without a single tremor in my hand. Jason blinked, clearly thrown off by my compliance. You are agreeing? Absolutely, I said smoothly, capping the pen and sliding the paper back to him. Financial independence sounds wonderful, but if we are running this marriage like a business transaction, then the services I provide for free are immediately terminated. Jason scoffed. Services? What services? I am no longer your maid, your personal chef, or your free nanny, I stated, leaning against the counter. Since things are strictly 50-50, you are now responsible for half of the cooking, cleaning, and child rearing. And during your 50% of custody time, if you need me to watch Leo while you entertain your clients or play golf, my hourly rate is $35. I will send you an itemized invoice every Friday by 5 p.m. Late payments will incur a 10% penalty. Jason let out a loud, mocking laugh that bounced off the subway tile backsplash. You, charging $35 an hour? You are a college dropout, Rachel. You are completely unemployable in the real world. Nobody would pay you minimum wage, let alone $35 an hour. The casual cruelty of his words might have hurt if they had not been so hypocritical. I dropped out of college because I had to. I fired back, my voice dangerously even. Or did you conveniently forget why I left my senior year? Because I remember working 3 separate jobs, opening a coffee shop at 4 a.m., waitressing all evening, and doing freelance data entry at midnight. Jason shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting toward the hallway. I worked those jobs. I continued closing the distance between us to pay off the $40,000 credit card debt you racked up during your genius crypto trading phase 4 years ago. You panicked, you cried, and you begged me to fix it before your firm found out and fired you for financial irresponsibility. I saved your career, Jason. I paid off your debt while you were busy trying to maintain your image. That is ancient history, he muttered, grabbing the signed spreadsheet. Just have your half of the mortgage ready by the 1st of the month. He turned and marched upstairs, completely unaware of the massive miscalculation he had just made. At midnight, while Jason snored loudly in the master bedroom, I sat in the darkness of my home office. I opened my laptop, but I was not doing data entry or playing around with a hobby. I logged into my private, highly encrypted banking portal. With a few swift clicks, I completely severed Jason as an authorized user from all my primary accounts. I canceled the joint credit cards that were actually funded by my assets. I locked down every single safety net he did not even realize he was standing on. The very next afternoon, Jason took his most important client to a famous downtown steakhouse, aiming to secure a massive portfolio account. The bill came to $500. He confidently handed the waiter his sleek metal card. 10 minutes later, the waiter returned, placing the leather folder back on the table with an apologetic wince. "I am so sorry, sir," the waiter murmured in front of the high-profile client. "Your card has been declined." The front door nearly tore off its hinges when Jason slammed it open. The sound vibrated through the hardwood floors of the foyer, followed by the heavy, aggressive thud of his leather shoes stomping toward the kitchen. I did not flinch. I was standing precisely where I had been the day before, leaning against the granite island, holding a warm mug of chamomile tea. I watched him march into the room. His face was a dark, mottled shade of crimson. The silk tie he had worn with such arrogance earlier that morning was yanked loose, hanging awkwardly around his neck. He looked like a man who had just been publicly flayed. "You stole my money!" He did not ask the question. He roared the words, pointing a trembling finger right at my face. "You hacked into my accounts and you drained my funds. You psychotic, vindictive woman. Do you have any idea what you just did to me?" I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea. How was the steak lunch with the Vanguard client, Jason? Did he enjoy the ribeye? Jason slammed both of his fists onto the island. The client paid the bill, he yelled, spit flying from his lips. My card declined. The waiter handed it back to me like I was some kind of street beggar. The client had to cover a $500 lunch because my own wife decided to throw a temper tantrum and lock me out of my own money. "Transfer it back. Right now. You are going to log into that laptop of yours and fix whatever illegal wire transfer you did, or I am calling the police." I set my mug down. The ceramic clicked sharply against the granite. "I did not steal a single dime from you, Jason. I just removed my safety net from your high-wire act." I reached over to the bar stool next to me and picked up a thick, heavy manila folder I had prepared that morning. I did not hand it to him politely. I tossed it directly at his chest. The folder hit him with a heavy thwack before dropping to the floor, spilling dozens of bank statements, highlighted spreadsheets, and credit card bills across the expensive tile. "Pick those up and read them," I instructed, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "Pick them up and look at the numbers, because you clearly have not looked at your own finances since we got married." Jason glared at me, his chest heaving, but his eyes darted down to the papers scattered at his feet. He bent down, snatching up the top page. It was his primary checking account statement from the previous month. "You make a decent salary, Jason," I said, projecting my voice so every word landed like a physical blow. "But you live like a billionaire in a movie. Look at your outgoing expenses. You lease a BMW that costs over $1,000 a month. You pay $2,000 in monthly dues to a country club where you only go to drink overpriced bourbon. You drop thousands on tailored suits, golf trips, and steak lunches. Your massive corporate paycheck evaporates the second it hits your account." He stared at the paper, his eyes frantically scanning the highlighted lines. "That is a lie," he stammered, though his voice had lost its thunderous volume. "I pay the mortgage. I pay for this house. I set up the automatic transfer." I let out a short, harsh laugh. "You set up a transfer of $3,000 3 years ago. Do you know what our actual mortgage is, Jason? It is $6,000 a month. And do you know what happened to your little automatic transfer? It started bouncing 36 months ago when you blew your liquidity on that crypto scam. Your account kept dipping into the red and the bank canceled the automatic routing." He froze, the paper crinkling in his grip. "That is impossible. The bank would have foreclosed on us. The house would be gone." "It is not gone because of my little laptop hobby," I said. taking a step closer to him, forcing him to look me in the eye. I have been secretly auto-paying the $6,000 mortgage for 3 years. I pay the $800 electric bill. I pay for the groceries you devour. I pay the out-of-pocket co-pays for Leo's developmental pediatrician and his speech therapy. I have been funding your entire illusion of wealth, catching every single bounce check and overdraft fee so your fragile ego would not shatter. All of that money in our joint accounts that you thought was yours. It was mine. The profits from my useless typing. And last night I simply moved my money back into an account bearing only my name. Jason stood completely paralyzed. The color rapidly drained from his face, leaving him a sickly pale white. He looked down at the statements again, his brain struggling to process the basic mathematics of his own life. "No," he whispered, shaking his head in frantic denial. "No, you are lying. You are hiding my money somewhere. You are funneling my assets. I demand you pay the mortgage right now. You are going to log in and pay the mortgage today before it is late." I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out the piece of paper he had so proudly shoved in my face the day before. The makeshift contract. I smoothed it out and laid it flat on the granite island, tapping my index finger right on his arrogant, looping signature. The ink was barely dry from yesterday, yet it already felt like an ancient artifact of his hubris. "I'm not paying your bills anymore, Jason," I said cheerfully. "We have an agreement, remember? You demanded a strict 50-50 split. You said you were sick of carrying a dead-weight wife. You wanted total financial independence. Well, congratulations. You have it. Your half of the mortgage is $3,000. Your half of Leo's therapy is $1,000. Your half of the utilities and groceries comes out to about $800. That is $4,800 due on the 1st of the month, which is tomorrow." He stared at the contract as if it were a venomous snake. He ran a trembling hand through his perfectly styled hair, ruining the expensive cut, pulling at the roots, as if physical pain could jolt him awake from this nightmare. The pristine image of the Wall Street titan was melting off him, revealing the frightened, irresponsible boy underneath. "And just to save you the trouble of checking," I added, my voice dripping with absolute satisfaction, "I looked at your individual balance before I removed my access. You currently have exactly $412 to your name. Good luck making up the difference by tomorrow morning." Jason opened his mouth to speak, to yell, to formulate some kind of defense, but his vocal cords failed him. He was suffocating under the crushing weight of his own financial reality. Before he could muster a single word of rebuttal, a sharp, vibrating buzz broke the heavy silence in the kitchen. Jason's smartphone, resting on the counter near my elbow, lit up with an incoming text message. The screen was locked, but the notification banner was bright and entirely legible. I glanced down. The sender name was simply listed as Brittany. I leaned in slightly, reading the text aloud before Jason could lunge for the device. "Babe, the landlord just called me. He said the rent check for my apartment bounced. What is going on? Are you coming over tonight?" Jason lunged forward and snatched the phone off the counter, flipping it over and shoving it deep into his suit pocket as if trying to bury a live grenade. He refused to make eye contact with me, his chest rising and falling in rapid, panicked breaths. I did not scream. I did not throw a plate. I did not demand to know who Brittany was or why he was paying her rent. I just looked at this pathetic, broken man who had spent 5 years trying to make me feel small. I smiled a sharp, genuine smirk that reached my eyes. "It looks like you have a lot of accounting to do, Jason," I said, turning my back on him. "I am going to read Leo a bedtime story. Do not forget to leave your half of the mortgage on the counter by tomorrow." And with that, I walked out of the kitchen, leaving him drowning in a sea of paper and bounced checks. The very next evening, the silence of my home was shattered by the sharp turn of a key in the front door lock. I was in the living room, sitting on the rug with Leo, helping him sort through his picture cards for speech therapy. I did not even have to look up to know who was letting themselves in. Only one other person had a key to my house, and she never believed in knocking. Patricia, my mother-in-law, stormed into the foyer like a hurricane in a tailored pantsuit. Her heels struck the hardwood floor with aggressive staccato snaps. She did not bother to take off her coat or offer a greeting. She marched straight into the living room, her eyes zeroing in on me with absolute venom. "You are committing financial abuse!" she shrieked, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. She pointed a manicured finger at my face, her bracelets clinking together. "You are deliberately trying to destroy my son." I gently patted Leo on the shoulder, handed him his favorite toy truck, and motioned toward his playroom. "Go play with your trucks for a minute, sweetie," I said softly. Once Leo was safely out of earshot, I slowly stood up, brushing a piece of lint off my jeans. I faced the woman who had spent the last 6 years treating me like an unwanted intern. "Hello, Patricia," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "It is nice to see you too. Please make yourself at home." "Do not use that condescending tone with me, Rachel," Patricia snarled, stepping closer. "Jason called me today. He was nearly in tears. He told me you locked him out of his own bank accounts. He told me his card declined at a business lunch with a Vanguard client. You humiliated him in public. You are actively sabotaging his career out of some petty, vindictive spite." I crossed my arms over my chest. "I did not lock Jason out of his accounts, Patricia. I locked him out of my accounts. There is a very distinct difference." "You are his wife," she yelled, her face flushing a deep, angry red. "Everything you have belongs to this family. He works 80 hours a week on Wall Street to provide for you and that child, and you repay him by stealing his money and starving him out of his own home. He is the man of this house." "He is a man who currently has $412 to his name," I replied coldly. "If he is starving, Patricia, it is because he ate his own money. He demanded a strict 50-50 split yesterday. He even printed out a lovely little spreadsheet and made me sign it. I am simply honoring his wishes. I stopped paying for his luxury car, his country club fees, and his tailored suits. If he cannot afford a steak lunch on his massive portfolio manager salary, perhaps you should be asking him where his money actually goes." Patricia gasped, clutching her designer handbag against her chest, as if I had physically struck her. "How dare you? He is an investment director. He has incredible overhead. He has to maintain an image for his clients. You know nothing about high-level finance because you are just a college dropout who plays on a laptop all day. You have always been a leech." The front door opened again, interrupting her tirade. Heavy, measured footsteps stepped into the foyer. Jamal, my brother-in-law, walked into the living room, carrying 2 large cardboard boxes stacked full of Leo's old toys that his own children had outgrown. Jamal was a stark contrast to the rest of this family. He was a tall, broad-shouldered African-American man who ran a highly successful cybersecurity firm. He was quiet, brilliant, and utterly immune to the chaotic drama his wife Monica and her mother Patricia constantly manufactured. Jamal stopped in the doorway of the living room, his dark eyes taking in the scene. He looked at Patricia's red, contorted face and then at my calm, unyielding stance. He set the heavy boxes down on the floor with a soft thud. "Is there a problem here?" Jamal asked, his deep voice instantly lowering the temperature in the room. Patricia immediately pivoted, turning her outrage toward him, expecting an ally. "Jamal, thank goodness you are here. Look at what this woman is doing to your brother-in-law. She is financially abusing Jason. She froze his accounts. She is a gold digger, Jamal. She has always been a gold digger." Patricia turned back to me, emboldened by Jamal's presence, spitting her words with pure malice. "You trapped my son from day one. You forced him to buy you that massive, ridiculous diamond wedding ring. You squeezed him dry before the ink on the marriage license was even dry, and now you are trying to ruin him." I opened my mouth to set the record straight about that ring which I had paid for myself because Jason's credit was too poor to finance it, but I did not have to say a word. Jamal stepped fully into the room, casually putting his hands in the pockets of his dark jeans. He looked directly at his mother-in-law, his expression completely blank, a stark, immovable wall against her hysteria. Patricia, Jamal said, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Jason borrowed $5,000 from me last Tuesday." The air was sucked out of the room. Patricia froze, her mouth slightly open, the venom dying on her lips. She stared at Jamal, blinking rapidly, trying to comprehend the words, what she stammered. "He came to my office." Jamal continued, his gaze pinning her in place. He was sweating. He begged me for a $5,000 wire transfer because he was 2 months behind on his country club dues, and they were threatening to post his name on the delinquent board. He told me not to tell Monica. He told me not to tell you. Jamal slowly pulled a hand out of his pocket and gestured toward me. So, Patricia, if Rachel is the gold digger, why is your Wall Street executive son begging me for cash to save his reputation? Patricia's face went from crimson to a sickly, chalky white. She looked at Jamal, then at me, her mind frantically trying to rebuild the illusion she had worshipped for 35 years. She could not process the fact that her golden child was a fraud. Instead of accepting the truth, she doubled down, wrapping herself in a protective layer of pure, unadulterated delusion. "You are lying," Patricia hissed at Jamal, though her voice shook. "You are covering for her because you have always taken the outsider's side. You two are teaming up against my son." She turned to me, her eyes wild, her breathing shallow and rapid. "This is not over, Rachel. You think you have won because you pulled a fast one with your little bank accounts. You think you are so smart. Well, I am going to call Monica right now. We are going to pool our money. We are going to hire the most ruthless, aggressive divorce lawyer in the entire state of Massachusetts." She pointed a trembling finger at my chest, backing toward the foyer. "We are going to strip you of everything. We are going to take my grandson, and we are going to kick you out of this house. You will be on the street with nothing but the clothes on your back. You picked a fight with the wrong family." I stood perfectly still, letting her threats crash against me and dissolve into nothing. I looked at Patricia, a woman desperately clutching onto a burning ship, completely unaware that I owned the ocean it was sinking in. I tilted my head, offering her a bright, genuinely warm smile. "Please do, Patricia," I replied smoothly. "Go hire the most expensive lawyer you can find. I would absolutely love to meet him." Patricia let out a furious, animalistic sound of frustration, spun on her heel, and marched out the front door, slamming it so hard the windows rattled in their frames. Jamal and I stood in the sudden silence of the living room. He looked at the front door, shook his head slowly, and then looked at me. "I brought the dinosaur sets Leo likes," Jamal said calmly, as if a nuclear bomb had not just detonated in my living room. I smiled at him, the first real smile I had felt in days. "Thank you, Jamal. You want a cup of coffee?" "I would love one," he replied, "because I have a feeling things are about to get a lot louder around here." Jamal was absolutely right. By Saturday afternoon, the volume in our upscale suburban cul-de-sac had reached a fever pitch, but it had nothing to do with my mother-in-law. It was the day of the annual neighborhood block party. The street was blocked off with bright orange traffic cones. Children were running wildly through the sprinkler systems set up on the manicured lawns. The heavy scent of expensive barbecue and imported cigars filled the warm summer air. Jason was completely in his element. He stood near the dead center of the street, holding a locally brewed craft beer, wearing a crisp designer polo that hugged his shoulders perfectly. He was surrounded by a tight circle of the other neighborhood husbands, aggressively holding court. I watched from the shade of my front porch as he bragged loudly about his latest portfolio yields and the aggressive market moves he was making at his firm. He was playing the role of the undisputed alpha male of the entire subdivision, projecting the image of a wealthy, highly successful provider to absolute perfection. Then the deep guttural roar of a heavy-duty diesel engine cut through the upbeat summer playlist echoing from the outdoor speakers. A massive industrial flatbed tow truck turned onto our street, effortlessly crushing one of the orange plastic cones and backed directly into our driveway. The hydraulic brakes hissed violently. A burly man wearing a high-visibility yellow vest hopped out of the cab carrying a heavy set of industrial steel chains. He did not walk up to the front door. He did not look around for the homeowner. He marched straight up to Jason's pristine midnight blue BMW M5 and immediately began strapping down the front axles. Jason froze mid-sentence. The craft beer slipped from his hand and shattered against the asphalt, foaming across his expensive leather loafers. He let out a furious roar and sprinted across the lawn, leaving his captive audience of neighborhood husbands staring in utter confusion. "Get your dirty hands off my vehicle!" Jason screamed, practically throwing his entire body between the tow truck driver and the gleaming grille of the BMW. "What the hell do you think you are doing? This is a massive mistake. I am a senior investment director." The music at the block party was abruptly paused. Every single neighbor, every wife holding a plate of potato salad, every husband gripping a barbecue spatula, turned silently to watch the spectacle unfold in my driveway. The tow driver did not even blink. He pulled a metal clipboard from his vest, completely unbothered by the screaming man in front of him. "I have a legal recovery order for this specific vehicle identification number. Step away from the car, buddy, or I am calling the police right now." Jason's face turned a violent mottled shade of purple. He spun around frantically, searching the crowd, until his eyes locked onto me, standing calmly on the porch. He pointed a shaking, aggressive finger in my direction, his voice booming over the dead silent street, completely abandoning any sense of dignity. "This is her doing!" he screamed to the entire neighborhood, trying desperately to control the narrative before it crushed him. My crazy wife canceled the auto pay. We are having a petty marital disagreement, and she is acting like a hysterical, vindictive woman trying to humiliate me in front of my friends. "Do not touch that car. I make mid-six figures. I can buy this tow truck and your entire company by Monday morning." I did not rush. I took a deep, steadying breath, picked up a crisp blue folder from the patio table, and walked slowly down the driveway. I felt the collective burning gaze of 30 neighbors tracking my every move, but I kept my posture perfectly straight. I stopped a few feet from Jason, who was currently trying to physically block the hydraulic lift from operating. I handed the blue folder directly to the tow truck driver. "Thank you for arriving exactly on schedule," I said politely, my voice calm and clear. "Here are the spare keys and the final authorization paperwork." Jason lunged toward me, stopping just inches from my face. "You are insane," he hissed, though he kept his voice loud enough for the surrounding neighbors to hear. "You think canceling one payment scares me? I will have my corporate lawyers sue you for unauthorized asset seizure. I paid the massive down payment on this car." I turned to face him, making sure my voice carried flawlessly across the silent cul-de-sac. "You did not pay the down payment, Jason. You wrote a personal check that bounced twice, forcing my holding company to cover the upfront costs just to avoid a federal fraud investigation." Jason opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The blood rushed out of his face. I turned slightly, addressing both him and the captivated audience of our neighbors. "This BMW is not yours. It is leased entirely under my limited liability company. 3 days ago, you slammed a contract on our kitchen island and demanded a strict 50-50 financial split. You told me you were sick of supporting me and demanded total financial independence. Since you insisted that we each pay our own way, my company is no longer providing you with a complimentary luxury vehicle. You are completely financially independent now, Jason. If you want to drive a luxury car, you can use your mid-six-figure salary to go buy one yourself." A low, collective murmur rippled through the crowd of neighbors. The other husbands, the very men Jason had just been lecturing about wealth management, were now looking at him with a mixture of intense pity and second-hand embarrassment. Jason stood frozen in the driveway, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocated fish. The grand illusion of his wealth had just been publicly stripped away. The hydraulic lift whined loudly, hoisting the gleaming BMW into the air and pulling it onto the flatbed. As the car settled heavily into place, the tow truck driver walked over to me. He reached into his heavy work pants and pulled out a small clear plastic evidence bag. "Standard procedure, ma'am," the driver said loudly, handing me the sealed bag. "We have to remove and bag any loose personal items found in the glove box before transport. I just need you to sign this receipt acknowledging I handed them over." I took the clear plastic bag. Inside was a tangled piece of bright red fabric. I held it up to the bright afternoon sun. It was a pair of highly provocative red lace women's underwear. The silence on the street became absolutely deafening. You could hear the breeze rustling the leaves in the oak trees. I looked at the red lace, and then I looked directly into Jason's terrified, wide, bloodshot eyes. I let out a soft, highly amused sigh. "Well," I said, making sure my voice was crisp and projecting perfectly toward the tight cluster of neighborhood wives standing just behind him. These are definitely not my size. You might want to text Brittany and let her know she left her lingerie in the glove box of your repossessed car. A collective audible gasp erupted from the neighborhood wives. A woman in the front row actually dropped her plastic cup, spilling lemonade all over her sandals. Jason went dead pale, his skin turning the sickly color of wet ash. He looked at the red underwear in my hand, looked at the horrified faces of the neighbors he had spent years trying to impress, and stumbled backward as the tow truck engine roared to life, driving his last shred of dignity down the street. The neighborhood scattered like roaches under a spotlight. The wives hurried back to their porches, whispering furiously to their husbands. Jason did not look at me again. He turned on his heel, his face buried in his hands, and practically sprinted down the street, unable to face the reality of his own making. He did not come home that night. I locked the doors, fed Leo his favorite macaroni and cheese, and slept better than I had in 6 years. The peace lasted exactly 24 hours. The following evening, the front door burst open with a familiar aggressive violence. I was at the kitchen island slicing apples for Leo, who was happily watching a cartoon in the adjacent family room. Heavy footsteps echoed through the hallway, but this time Jason had brought an audience. He marched into the kitchen, his chest puffed out in a desperate display of renewed bravado. Flanking his right side was Patricia, her lips pursed in a triumphant sneer. On his left was Monica, Jason's younger sister, wearing a tennis skirt and a scowl that perfectly mirrored her mother's. Directly behind them was a man I had never seen before. He wore a cheap, shiny gray suit that pulled too tight across his shoulders and carried a battered leather briefcase. He reeked of cheap cologne and predatory confidence. Trailing at the very back of the group was Jamal. He carried no aggression. He simply leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms over his chest, his eyes scanning the room with quiet, analytical precision. "Rachel," Jason announced, his voice laced with venomous authority. "I told you yesterday that playtime was over. Since you want to run this marriage like a business, we are making some structural changes." The man in the shiny suit stepped forward, dropping his briefcase heavily onto my pristine granite counter. He did not offer a handshake. He snapped open the brass latches, reached inside, and pulled out a thick, legal-sized document. He slapped it down directly over my cutting board. "My name is Marcus Vance," the man stated, slicking back his thinning hair. "I represent your husband in all upcoming civil and marital litigation. What you are looking at is a formal 30-day notice of eviction. You have exactly 1 month to vacate these premises, remove your personal property, and turn over all keys." I set my paring knife down slowly. I looked at the paper, then at the sleazy lawyer. An eviction notice. "That is right," Jason spat, stepping closer to the island. "You want to charge me rent. You want to humiliate me in front of my neighbors. You are standing in my house, Rachel. I bought this property 3 years before I ever met you. My name is on the original mortgage. It is a premarital asset, which means it is my sole and separate property. You have absolutely no legal right to reside here without my consent, and my consent is officially revoked." Patricia clapped her hands together, a sharp, delighted sound. "I told you, Jason. I told you we just needed to bring in the professionals. We are done playing nice with a gold-digging college dropout." Monica pushed her way to the front, leaning over the counter to get closer to my face. Her eyes were wide with malicious glee. "You really thought you were a genius, did you not, Rachel? You thought hiding his money and stealing his car made you a boss. You are nothing. You are a glorified maid who got lucky for a few years." Monica gestured dismissively toward the family room where Leo was laughing at the television. "Pack up your cheap Target bags and take that defective kid of yours back to whatever trailer park you crawled out of. This family is done subsidizing your pathetic life." The air in the kitchen turned instantly to ice. The mention of my son, the casual, vicious cruelty directed at a 5-year-old boy with a speech delay, extinguished any remaining shred of restraint I possessed. My hands did not shake. My heart did not race. A deep, absolute calm settled over my entire body. I looked past Monica's sneering face and met Jamal's eyes. He had uncrossed his arms. His jaw was tight, a muscle ticking in his cheek. He looked at me, gave a single, almost imperceptible nod of solidarity, and took a step back, giving me the floor. He despised his wife's cruelty just as much as I did. I picked up a kitchen towel, wiped the apple juice from my fingers, and tossed the towel onto the counter. Defective! I repeated, my voice so quiet and sharp it made the lawyer flinch. You come into my home, stand in my kitchen, and call my son defective. It is not your home, Jason yelled, slamming his hand next to the eviction notice. Get that through your thick skull. The deed is in my name. I own this dirt. You own nothing. I did not argue. I turned my back on all of them and walked calmly toward the walk-in pantry. Tucked behind the bulk bags of flour and the stacks of canned goods was a small, heavy steel lockbox bolted directly into the wall framing. I spun the combination dial with practiced ease. The heavy metal door clicked open. I reached inside, bypassing the passports and the birth certificates, and pulled out a single crisp sheet of heavy stock paper. It bore the raised, embossed seal of the Suffolk County Registry of Deeds. I walked back into the kitchen. The goon squad was watching me with varying degrees of confusion. I ignored Jason. I ignored his mother and his cruel sister. I walked directly up to Marcus Vance, the lawyer who was already mentally spending his retainer fee. I held the document out and slid it smoothly across the granite, bringing it to a rest directly on top of his eviction notice. You seem like a thorough professional, Marcus, I said, keeping my gaze locked on his eyes. Before you drafted a fraudulent eviction notice and marched into a house to threaten a mother and her child, did you bother to pull the current property records from the county clerk? Marcus frowned, his brow furrowing. He looked down at the document. He adjusted his suit jacket, picked up the heavy paper, and began to read. I watched the exact moment his reading comprehension caught up with reality. The smug, predatory smile vanished from his face. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking nauseous. A bead of sweat instantly materialized on his forehead. He read the paragraph again, his eyes widening in absolute horror. Jason was pacing nervously. What is it, Marcus? Tell her to pack her bags. We are calling the police if she refuses to leave. Marcus slowly lowered the paper. His hand was visibly shaking. He did not look at me. He turned his head slowly, his terrified eyes fixing on Jason. Jason. Marcus stammered, his voice cracking, completely devoid of its former bravado. Jason, you did not tell me you signed a quitclaim deed. The silence in the kitchen was so profound, I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator. Marcus Vance, the supposedly ruthless attorney, looked as though the expensive granite countertop had suddenly caught fire. He dropped the paper, taking a large, frantic step backward. Jason snatched the document from the counter. His eyes darted wildly across the page, scanning the heavy black ink, the official notary stamps, and the undeniable county seal. His mouth moved silently as he read his own signature at the bottom of the page. The color completely vanished from his face, leaving him looking like a hollow shell. What is this? Patricia demanded, her voice losing its screeching edge, replaced by a sudden creeping panic. What does that mean? Jason, what is a quitclaim deed? I leaned forward, resting my hands on the cool granite. I would be delighted to explain it to you, Patricia, I said, my voice dripping with honeyed poison. You see, 3 years ago, your perfect Wall Street executive son attended a corporate holiday party. He drank an entire bottle of expensive scotch and decided he was far too important to call a cab. He ran his pristine BMW through a red light and completely totaled a minivan. Jason flinched as if I had physically struck him. Monica gasped, stepping back from her brother. Thankfully, nobody was killed. I continued, my gaze locked on Patricia, whose mouth was now hanging wide open, but the driver of the minivan suffered severe spinal injuries. They threatened a massive multi-million-dollar civil lawsuit. Jason came home that night, collapsed right here on this very kitchen floor, and sobbed like a frightened child. He was terrified the lawsuit would seize this house and destroy his pristine image at the firm. I turned my attention to Jason, watching his chest heave with panicked, shallow breaths. Do you remember what you begged me to do that night, Jason? I asked softly. You handed me the deed and said, take the house. Just do not let them ruin my reputation. You transferred 100% of this property into my name to hide your assets from the victim of your own reckless arrogance. That was a temporary transfer. Jason yelled, his voice cracking violently. It was just until the lawsuit settled out of court. You were supposed to transfer it back. You tricked me. There was no trick, Jason. You legally signed away your only major asset to save your own skin, I replied calmly. And while you were busy trying to forget that night ever happened, you also forgot to look at the property tax records. Not only is the deed entirely in my name, but there is no longer a banknote attached to this property. Monica scoffed, rolling her eyes in a desperate attempt to regain control. Oh, please, you expect us to believe you pay the mortgage on a house like this? I do not pay the mortgage, Monica, I corrected her smoothly, because there is no mortgage. I paid off the remaining balance in full last November, using the profits from my little laptop hobby. I own this house free and clear, legally and financially. Your brother is standing on my dirt. Marcus the lawyer let out a heavy, exasperated breath. He reached forward, grabbed his shiny briefcase, and snapped the brass latches shut with a loud final click. Where are you going? Jason demanded, grabbing the lawyer by his cheap gray sleeve. You are my attorney. Do something. Evict her. Marcus yanked his arm free, his face twisted in utter disgust. You hired me to evict a squatter from your property, Jason. You conveniently forgot to mention that you signed away the deed 3 years ago. She is the sole legal owner of this estate. You have absolutely no case, and I am not risking my license pursuing a fraudulent eviction. I will be sending you a bill for my time. The lawyer turned on his heel and practically ran out the front door. The heavy slam of the wood echoed through the foyer, sealing Jason's fate. Patricia collapsed onto one of the bar stools. She stared at her son, her hands trembling in her lap. The illusion of her golden boy was completely shattered. Jamal stood by the doorway, a faint, highly amused smirk playing on his lips. He crossed his arms again, thoroughly enjoying the complete destruction of his arrogant brother-in-law. I reached across the island and picked up the 30-day eviction notice Marcus had left behind. I picked up a black ink pen, tapped it twice on the granite, and slid the paper directly across the counter until it bumped against Jason's chest. Cross out my name and write yours. I instructed, my voice ringing with absolute chilling authority. You have exactly 30 days to pack your tailored suits, your golf clubs, and whatever is left of your dignity and vacate my property. Jason stared at the paper. The muscles in his neck strained, and the veins at his temples bulged against his skin. He was a cornered animal, stripped of his money, his luxury car, and now his home. He looked around the kitchen, realizing he had absolutely no leverage left. His eyes finally locked onto mine, burning with a dark, desperate, feral rage. Fine, he snarled, leaning across the island, his voice dropping into a vicious, shaking whisper. Keep the damn house. Keep the walls and the roof. But I am taking Leo. I did not blink. I did not step back. You think you have won because you played a clever little real estate trick? Jason spat, a deranged smile stretching across his face. Let us see how clever you are in family court. I am a respected Wall Street portfolio manager with an impeccable corporate pedigree. You are an unemployed college dropout with absolutely no verifiable income. You have no W-2. You have no employer. You sit at home playing on the internet. No judge in this state is going to hand primary custody of a special needs child to a jobless stay-at-home mother when the father makes mid-six figures. I will tie you up in litigation until you are bankrupt, and I will take my son. I watched Jason's face contort with a desperate, ugly rage. He wanted me to break. He wanted me to scream, to cry, to give him a reason to prove I was the unstable, hysterical woman he so desperately needed me to be. Instead, I let out a short, hollow laugh. You do not have the liquid capital for a protracted legal battle, Jason, I said, my voice eerily calm and echoing in the quiet kitchen. And my little laptop hobby generated enough revenue to pay off $1 million mortgage in a single lump sum. Let us see what a family court judge thinks about your moral character when I present your bounce checks and your little red lace secret. Now get out of my house. Jason sneered, his chest heaving, but he turned and marched out the front door, his mother trailing behind him like a beaten dog. Monica lingered just long enough to shoot me a look of pure, unadulterated venom before following them out. The heavy mahogany door slammed shut, rattling the picture frames in the hallway. I had won the battle for the house, but Jason's threat regarding Leo echoed loudly in my mind. He was desperate, and desperate men were dangerous. The next afternoon, the late summer sun beat down heavily on the asphalt of the local elementary school parking lot. I stood by the passenger side of my SUV waiting for Leo to finish his weekly speech therapy session. He had been making incredible progress recently, stringing together full confident sentences that filled my chest with absolute pride. I saw him emerge from the double glass doors holding the hand of his therapist, a bright, triumphant smile spread across his face. I waved, stepping forward to meet them halfway. Before my foot even hit the sidewalk, a sleek white Range Rover swerved recklessly into the parking space directly next to mine, the tires squealing harshly against the pavement. The driver's side door flew open and Monica stepped out. She was practically vibrating with rage, her designer sunglasses pushed up into her perfectly highlighted hair, her hands curled into tight fists. She marched straight toward my car, deliberately positioning her body between me and the passenger door, blocking my access to my own vehicle. "You think you are so incredibly smart?" Monica hissed, her voice loud and grating, drawing the attention of two nearby mothers holding hands with their toddlers. "You manipulated my brother into signing away his house when he was vulnerable and terrified. You are a con artist, Rachel, and I am going to expose you." I kept my voice low, intensely aware of Leo approaching the sidewalk behind me. "Move away from my car, Monica. This is not the time or the place for your tantrums. I will decide the time and the place." She snapped, stepping closer, aggressively invading my personal space. Her breath smelled of stale iced coffee and bitter mints. "You are completely unfit to raise a child. You are unemployed. You stole Jason's premarital assets. You humiliated my mother. I am calling Child Protective Services today. I am going to tell them exactly what kind of unstable, vindictive environment you are subjecting my nephew to. They will rip him out of your hands before the week is over." I felt a freezing spike of adrenaline shoot through my veins. Threatening my property was one thing. Threatening my child was a line no one was allowed to cross. I took a step forward, forcing Monica to back up slightly. "If you ever speak my son's name again," I said, my voice dropping to a lethal, razor-sharp whisper, "I will systematically dismantle your entire life." Monica opened her mouth to scream a response, her face turning a blotchy red, but the sharp, deafening blast of a car horn cut her off completely. A black luxury SUV pulled up directly behind her Range Rover, blocking it in so tightly she could not have backed out if she tried. The heavy door swung open, and Jamal stepped out onto the hot asphalt. He did not look like the quiet, observant man who had leaned against my kitchen doorframe the night before. He looked furious. He strode across the parking lot with heavy, deliberate steps, his imposing frame towering completely over his wife. He did not yell. He did not wave his hands. His absolute, uncompromising authority commanded the space instantly. "Step away from her car," Monica. Jamal ordered, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that commanded immediate obedience. Monica spun around, her face twisting in outraged disbelief. "Excuse me, are you seriously taking her side right now? She is destroying my brother. She is an outsider, Jamal. You are supposed to be my husband." Jamal looked down at her, his expression radiating pure, unfiltered disgust. "Rachel is the only decent person in this family. I am done watching you all abuse her. I am done watching your mother demean her. And I am absolutely done watching you threaten a mother and her child in a school parking lot." Monica gasped loudly, her mouth falling open in shock. "You cannot speak to me like that." "Not." "Get in the car," Jamal commanded, pointing a rigid finger toward the passenger side of his SUV. "Do not say another word. Get in the car right now, or I will pack my bags tonight and you can explain to your country club friends why your marriage failed." For a second, Monica looked like she might defy him, her pride warring with her panic. But the absolute, unwavering resolve in Jamal's dark eyes broke her. She let out a frustrated, humiliated noise, spun on her heel, and stomped toward his vehicle. She yanked the passenger door open and threw herself inside, slamming the door hard enough to rock the heavy frame of the SUV. Jamal stood in the parking lot watching his wife seethe behind the tinted glass. He let out a long, heavy exhale, the tension slowly leaving his broad shoulders. He turned back to me. The anger vanished from his face, replaced by a grave, urgent seriousness that made the hair on my arms stand up. "I am sorry about her," he said quietly, ensuring his voice did not carry. "They have lived in an echo chamber of their own entitlement for so long they actually believe their own lies." "Thank you," I said, my heart still hammering aggressively against my ribs. "I had it handled, but I appreciate you stepping in." She was crossing a dangerous line. Jamal shook his head slowly. "You do not have it entirely handled, Rachel. Jason is a desperate man. And he is far more dangerous than just an angry ex-husband trying to steal a house back." He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket. He pulled out a small metallic object and held it out to me. It was an encrypted USB flash drive, heavy and cold in the afternoon sun. I looked at the drive, then up at Jamal's serious eyes. "What is this?" Jamal took a step closer, glancing over his shoulder to ensure no one was within earshot. "Jason stayed at our house a few times last month when you two were fighting. He used my secure home network to log into his corporate accounts late at night. He pressed the cold metal drive directly into the palm of my hand and closed my fingers tightly over it." "I work in cybersecurity?" "Rachel." Jamal whispered, his tone deadly serious and laced with absolute certainty. "He left a digital trail. A massive one. I pulled the logs. You need to look at the files on that drive the second you get home. He is not just cheating on you. He is stealing from his clients." I drove away from the elementary school with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned pale. The small, heavy flash drive Jamal had pressed into my palm burned a hole in the pocket of my jacket. I went through the rest of the evening motions with absolute mechanical precision. I cooked dinner, bathed Leo, read him his favorite books, and sat by his bed until his breathing fell into the steady, deep rhythm of sleep. Only then did I walk down the hall step into my home office and lock the heavy wooden door securely behind me. The room was bathed in the cool blue glow of my dual monitors. I sat down at my mahogany desk, staring at the metallic drive. I plugged it into my encrypted workstation. A password prompt immediately flashed onto the screen. Jamal had texted me a complex string of alphanumeric characters on a secure messaging app during my drive home. I typed it in, holding my breath, as the system verified the key. The progress bar crawled across the screen, unlocking the digital vault Jason thought he had kept completely hidden. Rows of meticulously organized folders populated my desktop. I opened the master spreadsheet labeled with a string of dates spanning the last 2 years. Jamal was absolutely right. Jason was not just a terrible, unfaithful husband. He was a spectacular, reckless criminal. The numbers told a story of absolute desperation and staggering arrogance. Over the past 14 months, Jason had been systematically siphoning funds from his oldest, most trusting clients. He specifically targeted the accounts of elderly widows and retired couples who rarely checked their quarterly statements or questioned his investment strategies. He was transferring small, steady increments, keeping the amounts just under the threshold that would trigger automatic banking alerts, moving the money into a complex maze of offshore shell companies. I traced the outgoing wire transfers with growing disgust. Thousands of dollars were being funneled directly into a luxury high-rise apartment lease signed entirely under Brittany's name. But the apartment was just a drop in the bucket. The real financial drain was his gambling. Pages of transaction logs detailed massive, catastrophic losses on offshore sports betting syndicates and high-stakes online poker rooms. Jason was bleeding his clients dry to fund an addiction and a mistress leveraging his entire career on the delusional hope that he could win it back before anyone noticed the missing capital. I sat back in my leather chair, the sheer magnitude of his fraud washing over me. Jason had stood in my kitchen just yesterday, puffed up with unearned superiority, bragging about his impeccable corporate pedigree and his mid-six-figure salary. He had threatened to take my son away using his status as a respected Wall Street portfolio manager. The reality was that he was a drowning man, stealing pennies from the elderly to buy himself another day of pretending to be rich. The irony was suffocating. He had called me an unemployed dropout. Yet here I was staring at the absolute destruction of his entire professional life, meticulously documented on a piece of plastic the size of my thumb. I leaned forward again, clicking through a subfolder containing his internal corporate communications. I needed to see exactly how he was bypassing his firm's compliance department. I opened a series of intercepted emails and internal memos. My eyes scanned the headers looking for the compliance officer's name. But my gaze snagged on the company logo in the signature block of every single email. Vanguard Investments. I blinked, the blue light of the monitor suddenly feeling blinding. I stared at the logo. Vanguard Investments. The name echoed in the quiet space of my office. It was a mid-sized regional wealth management firm that catered to old money families in New England. I knew the name. I knew it intimately. A cold, sharp thrill shot down my spine. I minimized Jamal's flash drive and pulled up my own secure business portal. My holding company, the one Jason assumed was just a little laptop hobby, operated entirely through anonymous corporate proxies and high-level attorneys. Over the past 2 years, I had shifted my focus from basic software development to acquiring distressed financial assets and struggling boutique firms. I typed my master password and opened my active acquisitions dashboard. There it was, sitting at the very top of my active portfolio list, Vanguard Investments. The firm had been hemorrhaging capital for 3 quarters. Their senior partners were desperate for a buyout to avoid public bankruptcy and federal audits. For the last 6 weeks, my team of corporate lawyers had been conducting aggressive due diligence, preparing a hostile takeover that would absorb Vanguard entirely under my corporate umbrella. We were in the final stages of the buyout. I was acquiring their client lists, their assets, and their entire staff. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. Jason had stood in my house and threatened to ruin me with his corporate power. He thought his job made him untouchable. He thought he held all the cards because he wore a designer suit and went to an office with his name on a frosted glass door. He had absolutely no idea that his firm was currently being bought out by a ghost corporation. He had no idea that the ghost corporation belonged to the wife he had just tried to evict. I looked at the calendar on the bottom right corner of my screen. I was literally a week away from becoming Jason's ultimate boss. I picked up my cell phone from the desk. I did not care that it was past midnight. I dialed the direct private line of my lead corporate attorney. He answered on the second ring, his voice alert and professional despite the late hour. "Accelerate the Vanguard acquisition." I commanded, my voice devoid of any hesitation, ringing with absolute authority. "I do not care what premium we have to pay or what aggressive legal maneuvers you have to execute tonight. Bypass the standard waiting periods. I want the final contracts drafted, signed, and the takeover completely finalized by Friday morning." My lawyer did not argue. "Understood," he replied smoothly. "It will be done." I hung up the phone and looked back at the spreadsheet detailing Jason's massive, undeniable fraud. He wanted to play games with my home and my child. He wanted to strip me of everything I loved. He was about to find out exactly what happens when you threaten a woman who owns the very ground you walk on. The hostile takeover of Vanguard Investments was officially in motion, moving with a silent, lethal velocity behind the closed doors of corporate boardrooms. But my immediate battleground was not a high-rise corner office. It was the bleak, fluorescent-lit corridors of the Suffolk County Family Court. True to his vicious promise, Jason had filed an ex parte emergency custody order the very next morning, claiming I was an unfit, destitute mother incapable of providing for our son. Jason strolled into the small, windowless mediation room, looking like he had just stepped off the cover of a financial magazine. He wore a bespoke charcoal gray suit that easily cost $3,000, a crisp silk tie, and a gleaming Rolex watch. He had replaced the sleazy eviction lawyer with a high-priced, aggressive family law attorney who carried an intimidating stack of leather-bound folders. Jason was playing a role he had perfected over the last decade, projecting the image of a concerned, incredibly wealthy, responsible patriarch fighting to save his son from a hysterical woman. The court-appointed mediator, a stern, tired-looking woman named Mrs. Gable, sat at the head of the long wooden table. As soon as we took our seats, Jason immediately launched into his meticulously rehearsed performance. He leaned forward, clasping his manicured hands together, projecting an aura of deep, paternal distress. Mrs. Gable. Jason began, his voice thick with manufactured sorrow. This breaks my heart. I truly love my ex-wife, but she has completely lost her grip on reality. She is currently unemployed. She has zero verifiable income, no W-2 forms, and absolutely no means to support a growing child. Leo requires specialized speech therapy, specific dietary accommodations, and constant reliable care. Rachel simply cannot afford it. I am a senior portfolio manager at Vanguard Investments. I have the significant financial resources required to give Leo the life and the medical care he desperately needs. Jason's high-priced lawyer slid a thick, glossy folder across the table toward the mediator. My client's financial disclosures, the lawyer stated smoothly. As you can see, Mr. Vance maintains a net worth in excess of $2 million, including robust liquid assets, diverse investment portfolios, and a mid-six-figure annual salary. We are asking for immediate full physical and legal custody to ensure the child's basic needs are met without disruption. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded neatly in my lap, letting Jason dig his own grave. Beside me sat Evelyn, a razor-sharp family law attorney my corporate team had retained for me the moment Jason filed the order. She did not even bother to open Jason's glossy folder. She simply adjusted her silver-framed glasses and looked directly at the mediator. Mrs. Gable, Evelyn said, her voice crisp and entirely unimpressed. The financial documents presented by opposing counsel are works of absolute fiction. They are uncertified, highly manipulated spreadsheets. We are formally requesting that this court issue an immediate subpoena for Mr. Vance's actual certified bank records covering the last 30 days. Jason's confident posture faltered slightly. He shot a nervous, quick glance at his attorney but quickly forced his arrogant, dismissive smile back into place. My financials are thoroughly documented, Jason scoffed, waving a hand in the air. This is just a desperate delay tactic from a woman who knows she has no money to her name. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, fixing my gaze directly on Jason's suddenly pale face. Your financials are a mirage, Jason, I said, my voice carrying a quiet, lethal precision that commanded the entire room. You claim a $2 million net worth, yet since I cut off your access to my holding company's accounts last week, your reality has drastically changed. Jason opened his mouth to object, but I cut him off smoothly. You are sitting here in a $3,000 suit pretending to be a master of the universe. I continued, my eyes locked on his. But the electricity at your new luxury rental apartment was shut off yesterday afternoon because the deposit check you wrote bounced twice. You do not even have the liquid capital to keep the lights on. Jason swallowed hard. The color completely drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking sickly and hollow. His lawyer turned to look at him sharply, clearly caught completely off guard by this revelation. Furthermore, I said, making sure every single word struck him like a physical blow. I pulled your personal credit report this morning. Your extravagant lifestyle, which was entirely funded by my hidden assets, has completely collapsed. Your credit score tanked to a dismal 520. You have maxed out every single credit card in your wallet trying to maintain the illusion of your wealth. You do not have $2 million, Jason. You do not even have $2,000 to your name. Mrs. Gable frowned deeply, her eyes darting between Jason's terrified face and the glossy folder sitting in front of her. The family court system possessed absolutely zero tolerance for financial perjury. She closed Jason's folder and pushed it firmly back across the table toward his lawyer. Mr. Vance. Mrs. Gable said, her tone suddenly stern and fiercely commanding. These are severe, highly specific allegations of financial misrepresentation. Before we proceed with any further discussions regarding the custody of this child, I require undeniable verification of your claims. You will produce certified time-stamped bank statements proving your current liquid assets by 5 o'clock this evening. If you fail to provide them, I will immediately throw out this emergency order, and I will personally recommend severe sanctions against you for committing fraud and wasting the court's time. Jason broke out in a heavy cold sweat. His eyes darted wildly around the small room, the sheer terror of his impending ruin crashing down on him all at once. He realized in that exact moment that the grand illusion was over. He could not fake a certified bank statement, and he knew his accounts were completely empty. He was entirely cornered, publicly humiliated, and absolutely broke. He abruptly pushed his chair back, the wooden legs screeching harshly against the linoleum floor, and muttered a frantic, unintelligible excuse. He practically sprinted out of the mediation room and burst into the hallway. Through the small rectangular glass window in the door, I watched him pace frantically. He pulled his cell phone from his tailored pocket with violently trembling hands, desperately dialing Brittany to beg his mistress for a loan to save his fabricated life. I watched through the small rectangular glass window in the heavy wooden door as Jason paced frantically in the courthouse hallway. He pulled his cell phone from his tailored pocket with violently trembling hands, desperately dialing Brittany to beg his mistress for a loan to save his fabricated life. Evelyn gathered her files with a satisfied snap of her leather briefcase. Mrs. Gable informed us that the mediation was officially terminated and she would be submitting her severe fraud recommendation to the family court judge by morning. I walked out of the building feeling lighter than air. Jason had sprinted away before I even reached the elevators. That evening, I was sitting at my kitchen island, reviewing the final acquisition contracts for Vanguard Investments when the heavy thud of fists hammering against my front door echoed through the house. The pounding was aggressive, relentless, and completely unhinged. I checked the security camera feed on my tablet. A young woman was standing on my porch, glaring directly into the lens. She looked exactly as I expected. She wore a pristine beige trench coat, designer sunglasses pushed back onto bleached blonde hair, and carried a handbag that cost more than my first car. It was Brittany. I locked my laptop screen, walked through the foyer, and pulled the mahogany door open. Brittany did not even wait for a greeting. "You need to give Jason his money back right now," she demanded, her voice shrill and echoing loudly in the quiet suburban street. She crossed her arms, trying to look intimidating, but mostly just looking deeply panicked. "He told me exactly what you did. You illegally locked him out of his own house, and you drained his accounts out of pure bitter jealousy. You are a thief, Rachel, and I am going to call the police if you do not wire his funds back to him immediately." I looked at the 24-year-old girl standing on my porch. She was entirely serious. Jason had spun a spectacular web of lies, painting himself as the wealthy, victimized executive, and me as the deranged, destitute ex-wife stealing his hard-earned fortune. I did not yell. I did not slam the door in her face. I simply stepped aside and gestured toward the warm, well-lit kitchen. "Would you like to come inside, Brittany?" I asked, my voice perfectly level and devoid of any hostility. I was just making a fresh pot of coffee. Brittany blinked, completely thrown off balance. Her aggressive posture faltered instantly. She had arrived ready for a screaming match, expecting to fight a hysterical, bitter woman. Instead, she was being offered a warm beverage. She eyed me suspiciously, but her curiosity clearly won out. She marched past me into the foyer, her expensive heels clicking loudly against my hardwood floors. I led her into the kitchen and poured 2 mugs of dark roast coffee. I set one down in front of her at the granite island. She refused to touch it, crossing her arms again and glaring at me with manufactured defiance. "Jason is calling his lawyers right now," Brittany threatened, though her voice lacked its earlier bite. "He said you manipulated a legal loophole to freeze his assets." I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the silence stretch until she shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Jason does not have lawyers, Brittany," I replied calmly. "He has one very confused attorney who realized this afternoon that his client is entirely broke. And I did not freeze Jason's assets. I simply stopped depositing my money into the accounts he was using to fund your lifestyle." Brittany scoffed loudly, rolling her eyes in exaggerated disbelief. "Your money? Please. Jason is a senior portfolio manager. He makes mid-6 figures. He pays for my apartment in cash." I reached across the island and pulled a thick manila folder from the stack of documents I had brought home from the courthouse. I opened it and spread the papers across the smooth granite surface. Let us review Jason's actual reality, I said, tapping the first document with my index finger. This is the deed to this house. As you can clearly read, my name is the only one listed. Jason transferred total ownership to me 3 years ago to hide his assets during a civil lawsuit. He does not own a single square inch of this property. Brittany stared at the official county seals on the deed, her brow furrowing in confusion. I slid the next paper forward. This is the repossession order for his BMW executed 2 days ago. He missed 4 consecutive payments. He did not lose his luxury car in the divorce settlement. The bank took it back because he is entirely insolvent. That is impossible, Brittany stammered, her gaze darting between the repo order and my calm face. He literally just paid the lease on my high-rise apartment. He transferred the money yesterday. I smiled, a cold, sharp expression that made her flinch. He did transfer the money yesterday, I agreed, but the money did not belong to him. I pulled out the printed spreadsheet from Jamal's encrypted flash drive. Jason has been siphoning funds from his elderly clients at Vanguard Investments. He has been systematically stealing from retired widows to pay for your luxury apartment and his massive offshore gambling debts. Brittany's face drained of color. The arrogant, wealthy influencer persona dissolved instantly, replaced by a terrified, deeply confused young woman. She looked closely at the transaction log, seeing her own name and her specific apartment complex listed directly next to stolen corporate funds. And here's the absolute best part. I continued, leaning forward slightly. My holding company is currently executing a hostile takeover of Vanguard Investments. By Friday morning, I will legally own the firm Jason works for, which means inadvertently my corporate assets were being used to pay your rent. You have been living off my money, Brittany. Jason is nothing but a broke, fraudulent middleman. No, she whispered, backing away from the kitchen island as if the documents were on fire. He is rich. He told me he was leaving you because you were holding him back financially. He told me we were going to Paris next month. Jason cannot afford a bus ticket to Paris, I stated flatly. He called you from the courthouse today because the mediator demanded proof of his liquid assets and he panicked. He begged you for a loan because he has absolutely nothing left. I turned my laptop screen toward her. On it was the final undeniable piece of evidence. It was a live screenshot of Jason's primary checking account obtained legally during our financial discovery process that very afternoon. Look at the screen, Brittany. She leaned in, her hands trembling as she read the digital numbers glowing brightly on the monitor. The balance stared back at her, absolute and unforgiving. $12.47. Brittany stood frozen, her eyes locked on the pathetic sum. The grand illusion of the wealthy, sophisticated Wall Street executive shattered into a million irreparable pieces. She realized she had wasted months of her life playing the role of the pampered mistress to a desperate, lying fraud who was about to face federal prison time. A profound, heavy silence settled over the kitchen. Brittany did not scream. She did not cry. The sheer shock of the reality check had completely rewired her brain. She slowly reached into her designer handbag and pulled out her cell phone. The screen was lit up with 5 missed calls and a dozen frantic text messages, all from Jason. I watched as she unlocked her phone, opened his contact profile, and hit the block button. She confirmed the action, deleting his entire contact history right in front of me. She dropped the phone back into her purse and looked at me, her expression completely hollowed out. "Thank you for the coffee," Rachel Brittany said quietly, her voice entirely stripped of its former arrogance. She turned on her heel and walked out the front door, leaving Jason's pathetic $12 reality behind her forever. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut, sealing the quiet of the house once again. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the empty mug Brittany had left behind on the granite island. The sheer speed of her departure was almost comical. I picked up the mugs, placed them in the sink, and turned on the faucet to wash away the last traces of Jason's fabricated life. Before the hot water could even clear the ceramic rims, the sound of metal violently scraping against metal shattered the silence of the foyer. The front door burst open with such explosive force that the brass handle dented the drywall. I had scheduled the locksmith for tomorrow morning, grossly underestimating the desperation of a man who had just watched his entire universe collapse. Jason had used his old brass key, the one he swore he had surrendered during our preliminary mediation. He stormed into the kitchen looking like a man actively losing his mind. His expensive $3,000 suit jacket was missing. His silk tie hung loosely around his neck, the knot yanked down in a frantic attempt to breathe. His eyes were bloodshot, completely wild, darting around the room before locking onto me. He was sweating profusely, the moisture causing his perfectly styled hair to plaster flat against his forehead. He did not say a word at first. He simply marched up to the kitchen island, raised his right hand, and violently slammed a thick, stapled stack of legal documents onto the granite. The sharp smack echoed through the high ceilings of the kitchen. The papers were heavily branded with intimidating, undeniable seals: the United States Securities and Exchange Commission, the Internal Revenue Service. They were federal subpoenas thick with terrifying legal jargon demanding his immediate presence and total financial surrender. "You reported me!" Jason screamed, his voice cracking with a hysterical feral pitch. He pointed a trembling, accusatory finger directly at my face. "You hacked my computer, you stole my files, and you went crying to the federal government." I reached for the electric kettle on the back counter, my movements deliberately slow and smooth. I poured steaming water over a fresh tea bag, watching the dark amber color bleed into the ceramic cup. "You are psychotic!" Jason continued to rant, pacing aggressively back and forth across the kitchen tiles. "You were so incredibly jealous of Brittany that you decided to destroy my entire career. You tipped off the SEC. They froze my Vanguard accounts this afternoon, Rachel. The IRS is demanding a full audit of my offshore portfolios. They are talking about embezzlement charges. They are talking about federal prison." I picked up my teacup, blowing softly across the rim, letting him expend his manic energy. "If you think you are going to walk away from this clean, you are absolutely delusional," Jason snarled, leaning across the island until his face was inches from mine. His breath was ragged and sharp. "We were legally married when those first transfers happened. We shared a last name. We shared a primary residence. I will tell the federal judge you were a willing co-conspirator. I will tell them you orchestrated the offshore accounts to hide your own assets. I will drag you down into the dirt with me, Rachel. You will rot in a federal cell right next to me." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my chamomile tea, the warm liquid soothing my throat. I set the cup down on the granite, the ceramic making a soft, delicate clink against the stone. "I did not report you to the SEC. Jason." I said, my voice ringing with a calm, terrifying authority that instantly paralyzed his pacing. "I did not have to." Jason froze, his mouth hanging slightly open, his chest heaving as he tried to process my absolute lack of panic. "You see, Jason, the financial sector operates on a very specific set of rules," I explained smoothly, gesturing toward the federal subpoenas scattered across the counter. "When a larger corporation initiates a hostile takeover of a struggling regional firm like Vanguard Investments, they do not just take the current executives at their word. The acquiring company deploys a team of ruthless independent forensic accountants. They tear through every single ledger, every wire transfer, and every client portfolio to ensure they are not buying toxic criminal liabilities." I leaned forward, locking my eyes onto his terrified, bloodshot gaze. "The forensic auditors caught your sloppy offshore transfers 3 days ago. They handed your digital trail directly to the federal authorities as a mandatory compliance measure. You were not destroyed by a jealous ex-wife, Jason. You were destroyed by the very corporate machinery you thought made you untouchable." Jason stared at me, the muscles in his jaw ticking wildly. He grabbed the edge of the island, his knuckles turning completely white. For a moment, the absolute horror of his situation seemed to crush the oxygen out of his lungs. But then the deeply ingrained arrogance that had defined his entire adult life flared back to the surface. He let out a loud, deranged scoff, throwing his head back and laughing like a madman. "You really have absolutely no idea how the real world works, Rachel." Jason spat, a twisted, desperate smile stretching across his face. "Vanguard is not just being audited. They are being bought out by a massive shadow billionaire, some faceless holding company with infinite resources. Do you honestly think a billionaire cares about a few missing thousands from a couple of retired widows? He adjusted his loose tie, attempting to regain a shred of his former corporate superiority. These people only care about profit margins and raw talent. They need aggressive portfolio managers who know how to play the game. I am not going to prison. I am going to the Vanguard Acquisition Gala this Saturday night. I am going to put on my best suit. I am going to walk right up to the new owner, and I am going to charm them into submission. By Monday morning, they will sweep these little SEC compliance issues under the rug, and I will be named vice president of the new regional division. I looked at the pathetic, arrogant man standing in my kitchen. He had absolutely no money. His mistress had just blocked his number. The federal government was actively preparing his indictment, and he still believed a charming smile could manipulate his way to the top. I picked up my teacup and took one final satisfying sip. I am sure the new owner will love to meet you. I smiled. Jason's face went entirely blank. The last shred of his fabricated bravado evaporated into the stale air of my kitchen. He spun around and practically sprinted out the front door, leaving a trail of profound, satisfying silence in his wake. Less than 48 hours later, the shockwaves of Jason's spectacular collapse reached the pristine, sun-drenched shores of Boca Raton. Patricia Vance sat in the plush leather chair of her local bank manager's office, wearing a crisp white linen suit and a string of pearls that had been in her family for 3 generations. She crossed her legs impatiently, tapping her designer pump against the thick carpet. Her golden boy was in deep federal trouble, and she needed liquid cash immediately to secure the most aggressive, high-powered defense attorney in the state. "It is a simple second mortgage," Arthur Patricia demanded, her voice dripping with the arrogant entitlement she wielded like a weapon. "My home is fully paid off. It is worth over $1.5 million. I need a line of credit approved by this afternoon. Jason is facing a minor misunderstanding with the Securities and Exchange Commission, and we simply must handle it discreetly." Arthur, a man who had managed Patricia's accounts for over a decade, looked physically ill. He adjusted his glasses, staring down at the thick stack of papers on his desk. He could not bring himself to meet her eyes. Patricia let out an exasperated sigh. "What is the holdup? Print the paperwork and let me sign it. I do not have time for bureaucratic incompetence today." Arthur swallowed hard, sliding a heavily stamped document across the polished mahogany desk. "I cannot approve this loan, Patricia. I cannot approve any loan. Your property has a massive active lien placed against it." Patricia froze, staring at the paper as if it were written in a foreign language. "A lien? That is absolutely impossible. I do not owe a single cent to anyone. My credit is flawless. You are making a mistake." "There is no mistake," Arthur replied softly, his voice full of pity. 2 years ago, a commercial business loan was taken out for $600,000. The primary collateral listed was the deed to this house. The loan went into default last month. The creditors have secured a lien to seize the property. Patricia snatched the paper, her eyes scanning the bold ink. "That is absurd. I never signed any commercial loan. I have never even heard of this holding company." Arthur pointed a trembling finger at the bottom of the page. "Your signature is on the guarantor line, Patricia, right next to the primary borrower." Patricia looked at the signature. It was an exact perfect replica of her meticulous handwriting, but she had never signed it. Her eyes drifted to the name printed boldly next to hers. Jason Vance. Her golden boy. Her perfect, infallible Wall Street executive son had secretly forged her signature to co-sign a bad business loan to cover his gambling debts. He had leveraged her pristine retirement home without a second thought, and now the bank was preparing to take it away. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. The color drained completely from her face, leaving her looking suddenly frail and elderly. By early evening, Patricia was no longer in Florida. She had boarded a direct flight back up the coast, driven straight from the airport, and was now pounding her fists frantically against my front door. I opened the door to find my former mother-in-law standing on my porch looking absolutely deranged. Her perfect hair was windswept and chaotic. Her linen suit was hopelessly wrinkled. Her eyes were wide, bloodshot, and filled with a frantic, desperate terror. "You have to help him!" Patricia screamed, entirely abandoning her usual icy composure. She tried to push past me into the foyer, but I stood firmly in the doorway, blocking her path. You have all that hidden money. You own that company. You have to pay for Jason's defense attorney. They are going to put my son in a federal prison, Rachel. You have to save this family. I crossed my arms, leaning casually against the doorframe, watching her unravel. I do not have to do anything, Patricia. Jason is a grown man facing the consequences of his own criminal arrogance. You owe us. Patricia shrieked, her voice echoing down the quiet suburban street. We took you in. We gave you the Vance name. You are sitting on millions of dollars while my son is about to lose his freedom and I am about to lose my home. He forged my signature, Rachel. He ruined me. You are his wife. You have to fix this. I looked at the woman who had made it her absolute mission to make me feel small and insignificant for an entire decade. I remembered exactly how she had treated me the night before my wedding rehearsal. I had been standing in the bridal suite trying to fix a tear in my dress when she walked in, looked me up and down, and sneered. Do you remember the night before I married your son, Patricia? I asked, my voice deadly quiet, slicing cleanly through her hysterical sobbing. You cornered me in the bridal suite. You looked at my modest dress, and you told me I was nothing but white trash who had manipulated my way into a respectable family. You said I would never amount to anything more than a pretty accessory for a successful man. Patricia gasped, her eyes darting away from mine, suddenly terrified by the cold, absolute certainty in my tone. You spent 10 years making sure I knew I was beneath you. I continued, taking a slow step forward. You mocked my background. You enabled Jason's abuse. You smiled while he tried to evict me and take my son. So tell me, Patricia, why would white trash have the money to save a wealthy family? The question hung in the air, heavy and irrefutable. Patricia's knees buckled. The pristine, arrogant matriarch of the Vance family collapsed completely onto the hard concrete of my front porch. She dropped to her knees, grabbing the hem of my jeans, openly weeping. Please, Rachel, she begged, her voice a pathetic broken wail. I am begging you. I will lose everything. He will go to jail, please. I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing. No pity, no vindication, just a cold, profound sense of closure. You raised a monster, Patricia. Now you get to live with him. I stepped back inside and pulled the heavy mahogany door shut. The latch clicked loudly, sealing her outside in the cooling evening air. Through the narrow side window, I watched Patricia sobbing on her knees. She was so consumed by her own destruction that she did not even notice the plain black sedan pull up to the curb. A tall man in a sharp gray suit stepped out of the vehicle and walked purposefully up the driveway. He held a thick manila envelope in his right hand. He stepped onto the porch, looking down at the weeping woman. Patricia Vance, he asked, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. Patricia sniffled, looking up at him with ruined mascara-stained eyes. She nodded weakly, too exhausted to question him. The man dropped the heavy envelope directly into her lap. You have been served, he stated simply. He turned on his heel and walked back toward his car. Patricia stared at the envelope. She slowly peeled back the flap and pulled out the legal documents. The header was printed in bold, undeniable ink. It was a massive civil lawsuit. Jamal was suing the entire Vance family for defamation, emotional distress, and corporate espionage. The Golden family was officially completely dismantled. Patricia stared at the thick legal envelope resting on her lap, the weight of Jamal's lawsuit pinning her to my concrete porch. The Grand Vance dynasty was unraveling piece by piece, and the final stage of their destruction was set to take place within the very walls Patricia was desperately fighting to keep. 48 hours later, the atmosphere inside Patricia's sprawling Boca Raton dining room was utterly suffocating. It was a mandatory family dinner, a desperate, pathetic attempt by Patricia to maintain the illusion of control and project a unified front. The crystal chandelier cast a harsh light over the long mahogany table. Jason sat at the far end, nursing a glass of expensive scotch, his eyes darting nervously at every shadow. His federal indictment was looming. His bank accounts were drained, and the silence in the room felt like a physical weight pressing against his chest. Monica Jason's sister and Jamal's wife swirled her expensive red wine, entirely oblivious to the terminal velocity of her family's collapse. She was wearing a silk designer dress, prattling on endlessly about a minor disagreement she had with the country club catering committee. Her voice grated against the heavy gloom of the room, a sharp reminder of the profound delusion that infected the entire Vance bloodline. Jamal sat next to her perfectly still. He did not touch the catered food on his plate. He did not nod along to Monica's complaints. He just watched her, his expression an unreadable mask of absolute calm. When Monica finally paused to take a breath and reach for her wine glass, Jamal stood up. The movement was deliberate and sharp, instantly commanding the attention of everyone at the table. He reached inside his tailored jacket, pulled out a thick-bound stack of legal documents, and dropped them directly onto Monica's porcelain dinner plate. The heavy thud rattled the crystal water glasses. Monica looked down her perfectly manicured brow, furrowing in confusion. "What on earth is this, Jamal?" she demanded, using a napkin to wipe a drop of sauce off the crisp white paper. "It is exactly what it looks like, Monica," Jamal replied, his voice echoing with a cold, terrifying authority. "I am filing for divorce." The dining room went dead silent. Jason choked slightly on his scotch. Patricia gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. Monica stared at the papers, her confusion rapidly morphing into explosive, unhinged outrage. She shoved her chair back so violently it tipped over and crashed onto the hardwood floor. She lunged forward, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated entitlement. "Are you out of your mind?" Monica shrieked, the sound piercing the quiet house. "You are divorcing me, you arrogant, ungrateful leech. You are nothing but a charity case. You were street trash before you married a Vance. I took you out of the gutter. I polished you. I gave you a name. I gave you access to high society and money you could never possibly comprehend on your own. You are a nobody without me." She continued to scream, hurling vicious, elitist insults that bounced off the dining room walls. She claimed she had single-handedly built his professional image. She yelled that he owed his entire existence to her family's prestige and generosity. Jamal absorbed every single word. He did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. He stood there like an immovable rock against a hysterical storm, simply waiting for her to run out of oxygen. When Monica finally stopped screaming, her chest heaving with exertion, Jamal adjusted his cuffs and looked her dead in the eye. "Are you quite finished?" he asked quietly. Monica opened her mouth to scream again, but Jamal cut her off with a surgical precision that commanded absolute silence. "You should actually read the documents you sign," Monica Jamal stated, gesturing down at the divorce papers. "It is a fatal habit your brother clearly shares. You stand there screaming about your wealth and my obscurity, completely blind to your own reality." He leaned forward, placing both hands firmly on the mahogany table. "That sprawling $5 million estate we live in, Jamal," began, his voice dangerously smooth. "I bought it in cash, entirely under a private holding company 2 full years before I even met you. I did not move into your world, Monica. I allowed you to live in mine." Monica blinked, the intense rage faltering for a fraction of a second as his words registered. Furthermore, Jamal continued, stepping around the fallen chair. "You have spent the last 5 years mocking my tech startup, treating it like a cute little hobby that kept me busy while you attended charity luncheons. That hobby recently went public. It is currently valued at over $80 million. You cannot touch that money." Monica spat, though her voice trembled wildly. "I am your wife. I am entitled to half of everything you own. My lawyers will strip you bare." Jamal let out a short, hollow laugh. "You do not have lawyers, Monica. Your family does not have a single dime left to hire a competent attorney, and you are certainly not entitled to half of my assets." He tapped the divorce papers resting on her dinner plate. "I protected every single one of my tech assets, my real estate, and my personal wealth in a bulletproof, ironclad prenuptial agreement. My corporate attorneys spent months drafting it, and you signed it without reading a single page. You were so blinded by your own arrogance, so utterly convinced that your Vance Trust Fund was the only asset worth protecting, that you gleefully signed away any right to my empire. You thought I was a starving tech geek marrying up. You played yourself. Monica stood frozen, the color draining completely from her cheeks. The reality of her situation hit her like a freight train. She was losing her husband, her home, her lifestyle, and she had legally barred herself from a massive fortune out of pure, willful ignorance. Patricia tried to stand up, her hands shaking violently. Jamal, please, Patricia begged, her voice frail and panicked. We are family. We can resolve this quietly. Do not do this to her. Jamal turned slowly, his sharp gaze sweeping over Jason's ruined posture and Patricia's terrified face. He looked at the family that had spent a decade building an empire of lies, deceit, and cruelty. You people are a cancer, Jamal said, his voice echoing with finality. Rachel was the only cure you had, and you treated her like dirt. He turned his back on the ruined dynasty. See you in court. Jamal walked calmly out of the dining room, his footsteps steady and measured. The heavy front door clicked shut behind him, leaving Monica penniless, falling to her knees and screaming into the empty, echoing halls of her mother's mortgaged home. Saturday evening descended on Boston, bringing with it a crisp, electric chill that matched the ruthless energy humming through the city's financial district. For the vast majority of the population, it was just a regular weekend. But for the corporate elite, tonight was the Vanguard Investments Acquisition Gala. Held at the ultra-exclusive Harborview Grand Hotel, it was not merely a celebration. It was a formal surrender ceremony. The regional firm had been bleeding capital for months, and tonight they were officially bowing their heads to their mysterious new owner. For Jason, this gala was his absolute last lifeline. He was currently standing in the cramped, mildew-scented bathroom of a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city. He had been forced to check in there after Brittany kicked him out and his credit cards were universally declined. He was furiously steaming his one remaining bespoke suit, ignoring the water stains on the ceiling above him. The federal subpoenas he had screamed about in my kitchen were currently shoved into the bottom of his duffel bag, buried under dirty laundry. In Jason's deeply fractured mind, those legal documents were nothing but a minor hurdle. He stared at his reflection in the cracked motel mirror, practicing his signature, devastatingly arrogant smile. He genuinely believed that his charm was a magic wand. He was entirely convinced that he could walk into that ballroom, locate the faceless billionaire who had just purchased Vanguard, and schmooze his way into a vice presidency. He reasoned that a billionaire would not care about a few missing thousands or some sloppy SEC compliance issues. A billionaire would only care about aggressive profit and raw talent, two things Jason firmly believed he possessed in abundance. He pulled his cell phone from the bathroom counter. His thumbs flew across the cracked screen, driven by a pathetic need to assert dominance over the woman he thought he had broken. He needed to feel big, and the only way he knew how to do that was by trying to make me feel small. Enjoy watching TV in your sweatpants. Jason typed, his lip curling into a sneer. I am about to secure my future. You will be begging me for child support by next week. He hit send, shoving the phone into his pocket with a surge of manufactured triumph. Across the city, in the sprawling, impeccably lit master suite of my Beacon Hill home, my phone buzzed softly against the marble vanity. I glanced down at the illuminated screen. Jason's name flashed, followed by his venomous, utterly predictable message. I let out a soft, genuine laugh, the sound bright and clear in the quiet room. He was so completely trapped in his own fabricated reality that he could not even begin to fathom the absolute avalanche that was about to hit him. I was certainly not wearing sweatpants. My bedroom had been temporarily transformed into a high-end professional studio. A premier glam squad flown in explicitly for this evening buzzed around me with quiet, practiced efficiency. I sat perfectly still while the makeup artist blended a smoky, dramatic eye that highlighted the sharp, uncompromising lines of my face. The hairstylist pinned my dark hair into an elegant structural updo that projected absolute, undeniable authority. There was no softness tonight. There was no playing the supportive, quiet housewife. Tonight I was going to war, and I was dressing for a total, unconditional victory. I stood up, allowing the stylist to help me slip into the masterpiece I had selected for the occasion. It was a breathtaking, custom-tailored Tom Ford evening gown. The fabric was a deep midnight blue silk that seemed to absorb the ambient light, cut with a sharp plunging neckline and a ruthless silhouette that commanded absolute attention. It fit like a second skin. It was elegant, predatory, and undeniably powerful. I looked in the full-length mirror and I did not see the discarded, destitute woman Jason had tried to create. I saw the apex predator of Boston's financial district. I walked over to my velvet-lined jewelry box. I bypassed the modest pearls and the subtle, cheap gold chains I used to wear when I was pretending to be Jason's financially dependent partner. Instead, I reached for a heavy, gleaming piece of hardware resting in the bottom drawer. It was a diamond-encrusted Patek Philippe watch. I had purchased it for myself 2 years ago in absolute secrecy on the exact day my holding company crossed $50 million in annual revenue. The cool metal snapped around my wrist, a heavy physical anchor, reminding me of exactly who I was, what I was capable of, and the massive empire I had built entirely in the shadows while Jason was busy playing pretend. The final piece was in place. The transformation from Rachel the victim to Rachel the conqueror was complete. My phone rang again, vibrating sharply against the marble counter. This time it was not a pathetic, desperate text from my soon-to-be ex-husband. It was a secure, encrypted call from Evelyn, my lead corporate attorney. She was already on site at the Harborview Grand Hotel, orchestrating the final details of my arrival. I tapped the screen to answer, placing the phone to my ear. "Everything is perfectly in place," Evelyn said, her voice thrumming with intense, focused anticipation. "The entire Vanguard board of directors is pacing the VIP lounge, terrified and eager to surrender their portfolios. And Jason Vance just walked through the front doors. He is currently standing by the open bar, actively bragging to anyone who will listen about his brilliant future with the firm. He has absolutely no idea what is coming." "Excellent," I replied, my voice smooth and chillingly calm as I smoothed my hands down the midnight blue silk of my gown. "Let him have his final glass of champagne." Madam Chairwoman Evelyn continued, the formal corporate title rolling off her tongue with deep, unwavering respect. "The limousine is waiting in the driveway. The board is eager to finally meet you." I smiled, turning away from the mirror and walking toward the bedroom door. Let us not keep my new employees waiting. The Harborview Grand Hotel was a towering fortress of illuminated glass and polished steel, currently besieged by an army of aggressive paparazzi and the absolute zenith of Boston's financial elite. Flashing bulbs shattered the evening darkness, casting harsh white light over the grand entrance, where thick velvet ropes dictated exactly who mattered and who did not. Jason stood uncomfortably close to the main entrance doors, aggressively tugging at the collar of his rented tuxedo. The stiff synthetic fabric pinched his shoulders and trapped the nervous sweat pooling at the base of his neck. With his bank accounts completely frozen by the federal authorities and his assets under extreme scrutiny, his designer wardrobe had been locked away in a penthouse he could no longer legally access. He felt entirely exposed, like a bleeding lamb dropped into a shark tank. He maintained a desperate, rigid smile, scanning the arriving luxury vehicles with frantic, bloodshot eyes. He was hunting for his savior. He needed to be the absolute first person to shake the hand of the mysterious new owner of Vanguard Investments. He had spent hours in the motel mirror rehearsing his pitch, a delicate blend of sycophancy and false confidence, designed to secure a vice presidency and save him from federal ruin. Just beyond the velvet ropes, a chaotic, humiliating scene was unfolding on the damp pavement. Monica and Patricia Vance were engaged in a bitter, escalating standoff with two massive stone-faced security guards. "Do you have any earthly idea who we are?" Monica shrieked, her voice cracking with hysterical, unhinged entitlement. She jabbed a manicured finger aggressively against the chest of the impassive guard. "We are the Vances. My mother is Patricia Vance. We are absolute royalty in this city. You will open this rope immediately, or I will personally ensure you are unemployed and blacklisted before the appetizers are served." The guard did not even blink, his expression carved from granite. "I do not care if you are the Queen of England, ma'am. You are not on the guest list. Step back from the entrance before I have you physically removed from the premises." Patricia stood slightly behind her daughter, her usual icy aristocratic composure fracturing into open visible panic. She clutched her vintage Chanel bag against her chest, as if it were a life preserver. The Vance name, a title she had wielded like a loaded weapon to terrorize the city for decades, was suddenly completely worthless. It was a bounced check in the highest circles of Boston society, and the sheer indignity of standing on the street like a commoner was making her physically ill. Jason completely ignored his mother and sister. He had zero social or financial capital left to bail them out, and his entire focus remained obsessively fixated on the curb. A low, powerful hum vibrated through the crisp night air, silencing the ambient chatter of the elite crowd. A sleek, armored black Maybach glided smoothly out of the city traffic and came to a flawless halt directly at the center of the red carpet. The atmosphere instantly electrified. The paparazzi went absolutely wild, their camera flashes exploding in a blinding, continuous strobe light that lit up the street like daylight. Hushed, frantic whispers ripped through the crowd of executives, socialites, and board members. This was the moment. The new faceless billionaire who had swallowed Vanguard Investments whole in a ruthless corporate acquisition was finally stepping out of the shadows. Jason's heart hammered a frantic, desperate rhythm against his ribs. He wiped his sweating palms vigorously on his rented trousers plastered on his most charming, predatory smile, and aggressively pushed his way to the very edge of the red carpet. He was ready to sell whatever remained of his soul. The chauffeur stepped out into the flashing lights, adjusted his tailored uniform, and walked briskly around the hood of the massive vehicle. He grasped the heavy silver handle of the rear door and pulled it open with absolute reverence. The entire perimeter held its collective breath. A single, sharp stiletto stepped out of the dark interior, planting firmly and deliberately onto the red carpet. Then, Rachel emerged. She did not just step out of the car, she arrived. The custom-tailored Tom Ford evening gown caught the blinding flashes of the cameras, the midnight blue silk shimmering like liquid armor draped across a warrior. The diamond-encrusted Patek Philippe watch on her wrist caught the ambient light, throwing fractured, brilliant rainbows across the pavement. She stood tall, her shoulders squared, her posture radiating absolute dominance. Her gaze swept over the crowd with the uncompromising, lethal authority of a goddess of war preparing to inspect her conquered territory. The paparazzi shouted questions, completely captivated by the commanding, devastating presence of the woman standing before them. At the very edge of the carpet, Jason's brain completely short-circuited. His practiced, charming smile slid right off his face, instantly replaced by a slack-jawed expression of profound, unadulterated shock. He blinked rapidly, his mind violently rejecting the visual information his eyes were feeding him. It was a physical impossibility. This was the woman he had just mocked. The woman he had confidently relegated to sweatpants and perpetual poverty. The woman he had gleefully promised would be begging him for child support. Outside the velvet ropes, Monica and Patricia froze entirely. Patricia let out a strangled, breathless gasp, taking a physical step backward as if she had been struck across the face. Monica's shock lasted exactly 2 seconds before it was entirely consumed by a blinding, visceral, classist rage. The sight of the woman she had tormented, belittled and treated as street trash for a decade, standing at the absolute pinnacle of power, was a reality her fragile, elitist ego simply could not process. "Security!" Monica screamed, her voice tearing violently through the ambient noise of the red carpet. She pointed a trembling, furious finger directly at Rachel. "Security! Grab her! She does not belong here! That woman is nothing but white trash. She is a total fraud. Kick her out right now." The sudden, hysterical outburst drew the sharp attention of the surrounding elite. Jason stood paralyzed, his rental tuxedo suddenly feeling 10 sizes too small and soaked in cold sweat. He wanted the concrete pavement to open up and swallow him whole. The heavy brass-studded oak doors of the Harborview Grand swung open with a resounding thud. The head of hotel security, a towering, intimidating man with a severe expression and an impeccably tailored black suit, marched swiftly down the length of the red carpet. Monica smiled triumphantly, her face twisted in vicious satisfaction, fully expecting the guard to seize Rachel and physically throw her into the street. "Yes, grab her!" Monica yelled, leaning aggressively over the velvet rope. Get her out of our sight immediately. The head of security did not even grant Monica a passing glance. He walked straight past the frantic, screaming Vance women, completely and utterly ignoring their pathetic existence. He marched directly up the carpet toward Rachel, stopping exactly 2 feet away from her. He snapped his polished heels together and bowed deeply, conveying absolute unquestioning deference. Right this way, Madam Chairwoman, the head of security announced, his voice projecting loud, clear, and commanding over the hum of the paparazzi. The VIP section is cleared for you. The board of directors is waiting. Jason's jaw dropped. The remaining breath rushed out of his lungs in a sharp, agonizing hiss. The realization slammed into him with the devastating, inescapable force of a freight train, entirely crushing the last desperate remnants of his fabricated reality. The mysterious billionaire savior he had been waiting to grovel before the ultimate corporate predator, who now controlled his entire professional existence, was the very woman he had spent 10 years trying to destroy. Jason stumbled through the massive gilded brass doors of the Harborview Grand, his legs moving entirely on autopilot. The blood roared in his ears with such violent intensity that it drowned out the classical string quartet playing softly in the grand foyer. His mind aggressively rejected the reality he had just witnessed on the red carpet. It was a cognitive impossibility. It had to be a grotesque, highly elaborate theatrical prank. Rachel did not have the capital to buy a modest coffee franchise, let alone orchestrate the hostile takeover of a legacy multi-billion-dollar investment firm. He shoved his way past a group of chuckling junior executives, completely ignoring their indignant protests. His rented tuxedo collar felt like a hangman's noose cutting off his oxygen supply. The synthetic fabric clung to his sweating back, a sharp, humiliating contrast to the bespoke Italian wool surrounding him. The main ballroom was a sprawling cathedral of corporate opulence. Massive crystal chandeliers bathed the room in a warm golden glow, illuminating hundreds of Boston's most ruthless financial predators. Waitstaff glided through the packed crowd carrying silver trays of vintage champagne and caviar, but Jason ignored them all. His frantic, bloodshot eyes scanned the massive room, desperately searching for the VIP section. He finally pushed his way to the very front edge of the crowd, stopping dead in his tracks, just behind the thick velvet rope separating the executive tables from the general floor. Sitting directly in the center of the room, at the most exclusive table, reserved strictly for the incoming ownership, was Rachel. She was sipping sparkling water from a crystal flute, listening politely to Vanguard's chief financial officer. The older, seasoned executive was leaning in and speaking to her with the kind of absolute terrified reverence usually reserved for visiting royalty. Rachel looked completely flawlessly at home. She did not look like the discarded woman Jason had attempted to evict. She did not look like the submissive partner he had spent 10 years trying to mold. She looked like the apex predator of the entire room. Jason clutched the back of a velvet dining chair, his knuckles turning stark white as he gripped the carved wood. He felt a sudden, violent wave of nausea wash over him. He was trapped in a waking nightmare, standing paralyzed as he watched his own personal apocalypse hold court. The heavy, dark velvet curtains at the back of the stage parted, and the ambient, buzzing chatter in the ballroom immediately died down to a respectful hush. Richard Sterling, the current chief executive officer of Vanguard Investments, stepped up to the clear acrylic podium. He was a man who usually commanded the room with effortless arrogance, but tonight his usual swagger was entirely gone. He looked exceptionally pale, thoroughly defeated, and noticeably sweating under the harsh glare of the stage lights. He adjusted the microphone with a trembling hand, the feedback whining briefly through the massive speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard began, his voice echoing loudly across the cavernous, silent room. "Thank you all for joining us tonight. As you are well aware, the past 2 fiscal quarters have presented Vanguard with unprecedented structural and financial challenges. We needed aggressive intervention. We needed visionary, uncompromising leadership. Tonight marks the definitive end of those challenges and the dawn of an entirely new era." Jason stood rooted to the carpet, unable to look away from the stage, even as his peripheral vision remained locked on the midnight blue silk of Rachel's gown. Vanguard Investments has officially been acquired in its entirety by Phoenix Holdings. Richard announced, his voice tight with forced enthusiasm. The transition of power is immediate and absolute. It is my distinct privilege to introduce the brilliant architect of this acquisition. Please welcome to the stage the sole founder, majority shareholder, and our new commanding executive, Madam Chairwoman Rachel. The ballroom erupted into deafening, thunderous applause. Wall Street executives, board members, and rival CEOs clapped with desperate, sycophantic enthusiasm, eager to curry favor with the new, undisputed titan of Boston finance. Jason was jostled by the men around him, physically battered by the sheer force of the standing ovation dedicated entirely to the woman he had tried to destroy. Rachel stood up slowly. She did not rush. She smoothed the invisible wrinkles from her gown and walked gracefully toward the stage stairs. The crowded room practically parted for her, men and women stepping aside with respectful nods. Every single eye in the building tracked her movement. She ascended the steps with lethal confidence, radiating an aura of total, unbothered superiority. Richard Sterling hastily stepped aside, bowing his head slightly, as he handed her the microphone and retreated rapidly into the shadows of the stage. Rachel took the center of the stage. She let the applause wash over her, allowing the silence to slowly, heavily stretch out until the entire room was holding its collective breath, waiting for her command. Her sharp, dark eyes swept methodically over the crowd. She bypassed the billionaire investors, the terrified department heads, and the elite socialites. Her gaze locked with surgical precision entirely on Jason. He was standing exactly where she knew he would be, pressed against the velvet rope, sweating profusely, looking as though the marble floor had just crumbled beneath his feet. The sheer terror radiating from his rigid posture was palpable from 20 feet away. Rachel smiled warmly at the crowd. It was a beautiful, disarming expression that did not reach her cold, calculating eyes. "Thank you all for that remarkably warm welcome," Rachel said, her voice smooth, perfectly amplified, and ringing with terrifying authority. "When I founded Phoenix Holdings, my core philosophy was incredibly simple. An institution is only as valuable as the absolute integrity of the people running it. Vanguard has incredible market potential, but it is currently suffering from a severe infection of arrogance, complacency, and toxic entitlement." A nervous, highly uncomfortable ripple traveled through the crowd. Executives exchanged terrified, darting glances. This was not a standard corporate greeting. This was a public declaration of war. "You cannot build a sustainable future on a rotten foundation." Rachel continued, her gaze remaining entirely fixed on Jason's pale face. "Therefore, my very first act as chairwoman is to clean house. Over the past 72 hours, my independent legal team has concluded a massive forensic audit of Vanguard's internal accounts. We found profound, unacceptable discrepancies." Jason felt all the remaining blood drain from his face. His heart slammed against his ribs like a trapped bird beating itself to death against a cage. The federal subpoenas, the frozen bank accounts, the forged guarantor signatures. She knew absolutely everything. The heavily gilded walls of the ballroom were closing in on him, the warm golden light suddenly feeling exactly like the harsh interrogation lamps of a federal holding cell. "We discovered gross negligence, willful fraud, and the direct, deliberate embezzlement of client funds." Rachel stated, her voice dropping to a deadly conversational tone that sliced through the absolute silence like a scalpel. "We do not tolerate corporate parasites at Phoenix Holdings. We amputate them." She took a single deliberate step closer to the edge of the stage, leaning slightly over the podium, her eyes boring directly into Jason's shattered soul. With that being said, Rachel announced, her voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers with terminal finality, "I would like to ask Portfolio Manager Jason Vance to please step forward." A blazing, high-intensity spotlight snapped away from the main stage with a sharp mechanical click. The beam of harsh white light cut directly through the dim, golden ambiance of the massive ballroom and pinned Jason Vance against the heavy velvet ropes. He stood completely, entirely exposed, The surrounding crowd of elite executives, recognizing the immediate, undeniable scent of corporate death, instinctively recoiled. They stepped backward in unison, moving with a desperate urgency, creating a wide, empty circle around him on the polished marble floor. No one wanted to be standing near the blast radius. Jason looked exactly like a cornered animal. His rented tuxedo clung to his sweating frame, the synthetic fabric suffocating him as the ambient temperature in the room seemed to spike. His hands shook so violently that he lost his grip on his crystal Scotch glass. It slipped through his trembling fingers and shattered against the floor, the sharp, violent sound echoing through the dead silent room. He stared up at the stage, his mind entirely short-circuiting. The reality of the situation refused to compute. He frantically shook his head from side to side, his eyes wide and bloodshot. His mouth opened and closed silently, mouthing the word "no" over and over again, like a broken record player entirely stripped of its volume. "Step up, Jason," Rachel repeated. Her voice dripped with an icy, terrifying politeness that paralyzed every single person in the room. The acoustic perfection of the grand ballroom carried her words to the furthest corners, ensuring no one missed a single syllable of his destruction. "You have spent your entire career desperate for the spotlight," she continued, leaning casually against the clear acrylic podium. "It is finally yours. Do not be shy now." Jason could not move his legs. He was physically cemented to the floor by pure, unadulterated terror. His heart slammed against his ribs with a frantic, painful rhythm. Rachel did not wait for his compliance. She turned slightly toward the transparent glass teleprompter angled perfectly in front of her. The scrolling text reflected faintly in her dark eyes, but she did not actually need to read it. She knew the horrific, damning numbers by absolute heart. Her eyes never left Jason's pale, sweating face. She wanted him to feel the weight of every single second of his public execution. Over the past 4 years, Rachel announced, her voice ringing out loud and clear, carrying the absolute weight of a judge delivering a fatal sentence. Jason Vance has engaged in a systematic, highly sophisticated embezzlement operation right here within the secure walls of Vanguard Investments. He deliberately and maliciously targeted this firm's most vulnerable elderly clients. A collective gasp ripped through the ballroom. It was a sharp, unified intake of breath from hundreds of seasoned financial sharks who knew exactly what that kind of scandal meant. Whispers erupted like a sudden brush fire across the tables. Old money investors shook their heads in profound disgust, while younger associates physically backed further away, desperate to avoid any implication of guilt by association. "We have traced exactly $184,000 funneled directly out of secure retirement portfolios," Rachel continued, surgically dissecting his carefully fabricated reputation piece by piece. "He diverted these stolen funds into an offshore account hidden in the Cayman Islands. A shell company, I might add, registered under his own mother's maiden name to circumvent internal compliance and avoid federal detection. He forged signatures, deliberately altered quarterly statements, and drained the life savings of widows who trusted him with their financial futures." Rachel paused, leaning slightly closer to the microphone. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, deafening, and completely suffocating. The entire corporate hierarchy of Boston was hanging on to her every word. "Jason often told me that we each keep our own money." Rachel stated, her tone shifting from clinical corporate detachment to a sharply personal edge. She let the quote hang in the heavy air, allowing the profound arrogance of his past behavior to echo through the grand hall. "It seems he took that to heart by keeping his clients' money as his own." The crowd gasped in genuine horror. Disgusted murmurs swept fiercely through the high society attendees. The very men and women who had been shaking his hand and laughing at his superficial jokes just 10 minutes prior now stared at him as if he were covered in a highly contagious disease. He was fundamentally ruined. His professional reputation, his career, his social standing, and his fake Vance legacy were being utterly incinerated in front of the most powerful people in the state. He had nowhere to hide. The sheer weight of the public humiliation finally shattered whatever fragile, delusional grip Jason still had on reality. The raw, unfiltered panic consumed him entirely. His primal fight or flight response kicked into massive overdrive and Jason chose flight. He spun around wildly, shoving past a horrified board member in a designer silk gown. "This is a lie!" Jason screamed, his voice cracking hysterically as he bolted toward the back of the massive ballroom. "She set me up. She is a fraud. You are all crazy. She is trying to steal my money." His rented tuxedo shoes slipped wildly on the polished marble floor as he frantically sprinted for the exit. His breathing was ragged, his chest heaving with sheer terror. He tore through the thick crowd of executives, violently knocking over a tall cocktail table and sending a silver tray of vintage champagne glasses crashing to the ground in a spray of shattered crystal and expensive foam. He did not stop to apologize. He did not look back at the stage. He just needed to escape the suffocating glare of the spotlight and the terrifying absolute authority radiating from the woman standing at the podium. He reached out his sweating, trembling hands, slamming hard against the heavy brass handles of the grand double doors leading out to the main hotel lobby. He threw his entire body weight against the heavy wood, desperate to break through to the street and vanish into the night. Before he could push them open, the heavy doors swung violently inward with a massive, booming thud. Jason stumbled backward, crying out in shock as he nearly lost his footing on the slick marble. The warm, golden light of the ballroom spilled out into the dark corridor, illuminating the imposing figures currently blocking his escape. 4 tall, broad-shouldered men wearing heavy tactical vests and dark navy blue windbreakers stepped firmly over the threshold. The letters FBI were printed in bold, undeniable yellow across their chests. They marched in perfect, intimidating unison, stepping directly into the grand ballroom and entirely cutting off Jason's only exit. The lead agent, a man with a square jaw and cold, dead eyes, did not slow his pace as he closed the final few feet between them. Jason took a pathetic, stumbling step backward, raising his hands in a weak, universally recognized gesture of surrender. It did not matter. The agent lunged forward, grabbing Jason by the lapels of his rented tuxedo and violently spinning him around. The sheer force of the maneuver slammed Jason chest first against the heavy mahogany doors he had just been desperately trying to open. The sound of his body hitting the wood echoed like a gunshot through the silent ballroom. Jason Vance, the lead agent, barked his voice, a booming baritone that easily carried to the very back rows of the astonished crowd. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and conspiracy to defraud the United States government." The sharp metallic zip and click of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting tightly around Jason's wrists cut through the air. The sound was definitive. It was the sound of a life ending. "You have the right to remain silent." The agent continued, his tone entirely bored, reciting the Miranda warning with the practiced rhythm of a man who arrested white-collar criminals for a living. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Jason squeezed his eyes shut, his face mashed uncomfortably against the carved wood of the door. He was trembling so violently his knees knocked together. Tears of pure, unadulterated panic streamed down his face, soaking into his collar. He could hear the crowd behind him. The absolute terrifying silence had broken, replaced by the distinct frantic clicking of smartphone cameras and the hushed, gleeful whispers of Boston's elite. The very people he had spent his entire adult life trying to impress were currently recording his federal arrest to circulate on group chats before the gala even ended. He was not just ruined financially, he was a social pariah, a spectacular joke playing out in real time. Before the agent could pull Jason away from the door, a shrill, completely unhinged screech shattered the atmosphere. "Take your hands off my son!" Patricia and Monica Vance had apparently utilized the sheer chaos of the FBI's arrival to slip past the distracted hotel security at the front entrance. They stood just inside the ballroom, taking in the catastrophic scene. Patricia's face was twisted into a mask of aristocratic fury. Her carefully constructed high society composure had entirely evaporated, leaving behind a frantic, vicious desperation. She charged forward like a rabid animal. Her vintage Chanel handbag swung wildly from her arm as she threw herself directly at the federal agent currently holding Jason's collar. "Let him go right this instant!" Patricia shrieked, her manicured nails clawing aggressively at the thick Kevlar vest of the lead agent. "Do you have any idea who we are?" "We are the Vances. My son is a highly respected portfolio manager." You are making a massive catastrophic mistake, and I will have your badge for this. The response was immediate, tactical, and entirely devoid of any respect for her perceived social standing. A second FBI agent, a tall woman with her hair pulled back into a severe bun, stepped forward. She grabbed Patricia by the wrist, twisted her arm sharply behind her back, and forced the matriarch of the Vance family face first into the adjacent wall. Ma'am, stand down immediately, or you will be placed under arrest for assaulting a federal officer and obstruction of justice, the female agent ordered, her voice cold and completely uncompromising. Patricia gasped in shock, her cheek pressed painfully against the decorative floral wallpaper. She struggled for a brief, pathetic second before the agent applied a fraction more pressure to her twisted arm, forcing a sharp cry of pain from her lips. The wealthy, untouchable Patricia Vance was effectively pinned, immobilized by the very authorities she believed she was vastly superior to. A few feet away, Monica was having an entirely different reaction. The reality of the situation had finally penetrated her thick skull. She looked at her brother in handcuffs, her mother pinned against the wall, and the hundreds of phones pointed directly at them. Her social life, her status, her entire identity was currently burning to the ground. She did not rush to help her mother. She did not scream for her brother. Instead, she shrank back against a decorative pillar, using her expensive sequined clutch to desperately shield her face from the flashing cameras. She was weeping, her shoulders shaking as she tried to make herself invisible, utterly and completely destroyed by the sheer magnitude of the social humiliation. The lead agent yanked Jason away from the door, turning him around to face the ballroom. Jason's face was a mess of tears, sweat, and snot. His rented tuxedo was rumpled and twisted. He looked pathetic. He looked broken. And then his frantic, desperate eyes locked onto the stage. Rachel was still standing behind the clear, acrylic podium. The harsh spotlight illuminated her midnight blue Tom Ford gown, making her look like a ruling monarch surveying a conquered province. She was watching the entire scene unfold with an expression of calm, detached satisfaction. Jason's mind snapped. He was out of options, out of money, and out of time. His ego collapsed, leaving only raw, pathetic desperation. He strained against the agent's grip, dragging his handcuffed wrists forward as he stared up at the woman he had treated like garbage for a decade. "Rachel, please!" Jason screamed, his voice cracking, echoing through the massive ballroom. He was sobbing openly now, his chest heaving. "Please, you have the money, you own the company. Pay them off. Fix this. You have to help me. You are my wife." The entire ballroom went dead silent again. Hundreds of heads swiveled back toward the stage, waiting with bated breath for the billionaire chairwoman to respond to the pathetic, sobbing criminal in federal custody. Rachel stood perfectly still. She looked down at him, her dark eyes devoid of any pity, any warmth, or any hesitation. She slowly leaned forward, bringing her lips close to the microphone. "I am not your wife, Jason." Rachel said, her voice echoing smoothly and flawlessly through the silent, cavernous room. "I am just the woman who charges $35 an hour to deal with your messes. And unfortunately, you cannot afford me anymore." 6 weeks later, the deafening metallic slam of a heavy steel door provided a stark, punishing contrast to the roaring applause of the Harborview Grand Ballroom. Jason sat on a thin, lumpy mattress that smelled faintly of mildew and industrial bleach. His hands, which used to confidently flash a gold Rolex, now picked nervously at the frayed seams of his standard-issue orange jumpsuit. The federal judge had taken one single look at the meticulously documented Cayman Island accounts Rachel provided and deemed him an extreme, undeniable flight risk. Bail was unconditionally denied. Jason was trapped in a tiny claustrophobic concrete box for 23 hours a day, entirely alone, with the crushing realization that his entire existence was a fraud that had finally caught up to him. He spent his days staring blankly at a water stain on the ceiling, completely stripped of his bespoke suits, his stolen money, and his fabricated legacy. No one came to visit him. He had zero leverage and zero friends. Across the state, the Vance family empire had completely crumbled into dust. The federal asset seizure swept through their holdings like a Category 5 hurricane. Patricia Vance's historic sprawling estate, which had been largely financed by the money Jason had siphoned from his vulnerable clients, was immediately seized and foreclosed upon by the government. Patricia found herself standing in the center of a cramped, incredibly depressing one-bedroom rental apartment located directly beside a noisy, elevated highway. The air inside the unit smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cheap floor wax. There were no servants, no high society luncheons, and no velvet ropes. She was aggressively taping a flimsy cardboard box containing the few basic items the authorities had legally allowed her to keep. Her vintage designer bags, her jewelry, and her artwork had all been auctioned off to pay for federal restitution. Her country club memberships were permanently revoked. Her elite friends had universally blocked her number. She was entirely erased from Boston society, reduced to clipping grocery coupons just to survive the week. Monica was experiencing her own custom-designed version of absolute inescapable hell. Jamal had executed his legal strategy with ruthless, flawless precision. He had successfully frozen every single joint account, locked down his personal assets, and filed for immediate full custody of their children based on her recorded erratic behavior. Stripped of Jamal's wealth and her brother's stolen funds, Monica was forced to enter the workforce for the first time in her life. She was currently standing under the harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights of a discount retail store, wearing a deeply unflattering stiff polyester uniform in a vibrant shade of neon green. Her feet ached terribly from standing on hard linoleum for 8 hours a day. A highly aggressive customer was currently yelling at her over an expired 20-cent coupon, jabbing a receipt directly in her face. Monica was forced to bite her tongue, swallow her massive elitist pride, and offer a subservient apology to a woman she would have previously treated like garbage. Her plastic name tag hung crookedly on her chest, a glaring, inescapable symbol of her total social destruction. Miles away from the misery of the Vances, Rachel was experiencing the absolute zenith of peace. Her newly purchased sprawling estate in the tranquil countryside outside of Boston was a sanctuary of lush green lawns, ancient oak trees, and brilliant afternoon sunlight. The massive stone patio overlooked a private crystal-clear lake that sparkled like crushed diamonds. Jamal walked through the massive glass patio doors looking like an entirely new man. The heavy dark circles that used to sit stubbornly under his eyes were completely gone. He carried himself with the light, relaxed posture of a man who had finally dropped a massive toxic weight from his shoulders. He was thriving, visibly happy, and entirely free. His 2 children ran past him laughing loudly as they chased a soccer ball across the impeccably manicured grass. They were immediately joined by Leo. Rachel watched her son run across the yard, her heart swelling with an overwhelming, fierce pride. The top-tier intensive speech therapy she could now easily afford had worked absolute wonders. Leo did not just look happy. He was entirely engaged, highly confident, and wonderfully expressive. He ran up to the edge of the stone patio, his cheeks flushed with joy, and looked directly at Jamal. "We are going to build a giant fort near the big tree," Leo announced, his voice clear, steady, and speaking in complete, flawless sentences. "You can come see it when we are finished." Rachel smiled brightly, handing Jamal a crystal glass filled with a rare vintage red wine. Jamal took a sip, leaning back comfortably against the plush outdoor sofa. "Your son is doing incredibly well," Jamal said, his tone filled with genuine warmth as he watched the children disappear safely behind the large garden hedges. "He is like a completely different child. He is confident and happy. He just needed a safe, stable environment," Rachel replied softly, taking a sip of her own wine. "We both did. It is amazing what you can accomplish when you finally remove the poison from your life." Jamal laughed, a deep, rich sound that echoed across the patio. "I could not agree more. My lawyers finalized the initial asset division yesterday. Monica gets absolutely nothing from my businesses. She actually tried to demand permanent alimony based on the luxury lifestyle she was accustomed to. The judge literally laughed her out of the courtroom." Rachel smiled, feeling the warm sun on her face and the cool glass in her hand. The corporate takeover was complete. Her financial empire was entirely secure. Vanguard Investments was already showing massive record-breaking profits under her strict, uncompromising leadership. But this moment sitting on a quiet patio, with an ally watching her son thrive and speak with absolute confidence was the true ultimate victory. She had built a fortress that no one could ever tear down. The serene, peaceful atmosphere was suddenly interrupted by the sharp, persistent ringing of Rachel's personal cell phone resting on the glass patio table. She glanced down at the illuminated screen. The caller ID did not display a name or a standard phone number. It simply read, Federal Correctional Facility, followed by an automated text prompt indicating an incoming collect call. Jamal leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees, and raised a highly curious eyebrow at the flashing screen. He looked at the phone and then looked up at Rachel, a knowing, satisfied smirk playing on his lips. Rachel picked up the phone. She looked out at her beautiful, sprawling estate, listened to the distant sound of her brilliant son laughing, and thought about her entirely secured future. A slow, chillingly calm smile spread across her face. She tapped the green icon and hit accept. She tapped the green icon and hit accept. An automated, distinctly robotic voice immediately filled the crisp, fragrant afternoon air, echoing slightly through the high-fidelity speaker of her phone. You have a collect call from an inmate at the Federal Correctional Institution, Danbury. Press 1 to accept. Rachel maintained her serene, unbothered composure, her manicured finger lightly tapping the screen once more. A sharp electronic click signaled the connection. Jason gasped. His voice was thin, reedy, and completely unrecognizable from the arrogant, condescending portfolio manager he used to play. It was the sound of a man who had been thoroughly and systematically broken. Rachel, please tell me you are there. Jason begged, his words tumbling over each other in a frantic rush. Please do not hang up on me. Rachel took a slow, deliberate sip of her vintage red wine, letting the heavy silence stretch between them. She wanted him to feel the vast, unbridgeable distance separating his miserable concrete reality from her sunlit sanctuary. I am here, Jason. Rachel replied, her voice smooth, level, and entirely devoid of any residual affection or pity. Oh, thank God, Jason sobbed. The sound was pathetic, a wet, guttural noise that lacked even a microscopic shred of dignity. Rachel, it is an absolute nightmare in here. You have to get me out. They denied my bail, but your lawyers can fix this. You have the capital now. You own Vanguard. You can post a massive bond, put up the estate, anything. Please, Rachel, I am begging you on my hands and knees. I am so sorry. I was wrong about absolutely everything. I love you. I have always loved you. Jamal sat quietly on the outdoor sofa, swirling the ruby liquid in his glass, watching Rachel execute this final maneuver with the cold precision of a seasoned general. When her icy silence persisted, Jason predictably resorted to his lowest, most manipulative tactic. Think about Leo. Jason cried, his desperation pitching his voice an octave higher. He needs his father, Rachel. You cannot let our son grow up with his dad locked away in a federal cage for decades. Please do this for Leo. Do not take his father away from him. Rachel did not flinch. Her dark, calculating eyes remained fixed on the sparkling lake in the distance, watching the sunlight dance across the ripples. When she finally spoke, her words were surgically precise, carrying the absolute calm of a woman who had already won the war and was simply surveying the conquered battlefield. Rachel began her tone conversational but undeniably lethal. Do you remember our anniversary dinner? The night you handed me that insulting itemized spreadsheet and demanded I sign a post-nuptial agreement. Rachel, please do not do this right now. Jason pleaded, his breath catching in his throat. I am speaking? Rachel interrupted, her voice snapping with the authority of a billionaire CEO. You sat across from me and specifically stated that you were entirely sick of supporting me. You told me that I was a financial burden, a useless parasite draining your hard-earned resources. You made it explicitly clear that you wanted a life where you did not have to pay for anyone but yourself. Jason whimpered through the receiver, the pathetic sound of a man completely out of options and drowning in his own hubris. Well, Jason, I have fantastic news for you, Rachel continued, a sharp, triumphant smile curving her lips. Federal prison offers completely free meals, a free concrete bed, and free institutional laundry. You finally have exactly what you always wanted. A life where you do not have to support absolutely anyone but yourself. You achieved your dream. Congratulations. No, no, no! Jason hyperventilated, his panic spiraling out of control. You cannot leave me here! You cannot do this to me! I am not doing anything to you, Jason, Rachel corrected smoothly, her voice completely unbothered. You did this to yourself. And just so we are completely clear on where things permanently stand, my legal team finalized our divorce proceedings this morning. Given your current federal incarceration and your meticulously documented history of financial abuse, the judge swiftly granted me absolute sole physical and legal custody of Leo. Rachel, please. You are completely erased from our lives, Jason, she stated, delivering the final fatal blow. You will never see me again, and you will certainly never see my son again. Enjoy the free room and board. Rachel, wait. I will do anything I will. Rachel tapped the red icon. The frantic, pathetic begging was instantly severed, replaced by the peaceful ambient sounds of the countryside. Without a single second of hesitation, she navigated to her settings, selected Jason's assigned facility number, and permanently blocked the contact. It was done. The final toxic tether was severed forever. Jamal raised his wine glass in a silent, deeply respectful salute. Rachel smiled genuinely, raising her crystal glass to meet his, the delicate chime ringing out like a victory bell. Mommy. Rachel turned her head. Leo was sprinting across the manicured lawn, his little legs moving as fast as they could carry him. His face was flushed with exertion and pure, unfiltered joy. He skidded to a halt in front of her, his breathing slightly ragged, but his eyes shining brighter than she had ever seen them. Look what I found for you, Leo announced proudly, his speech perfectly clear and delightfully confident. He held out his small hand, presenting her with a single vibrant yellow wildflower he had plucked from the edge of the sprawling garden. Rachel knelt down onto the expensive flagstone patio, her heart expanding until she thought it might physically burst. She took the small flower, pulling her beautiful, thriving son into a fierce, intensely loving embrace. Thank you, my sweet boy, she whispered into his hair. It is the most beautiful flower in the entire world. As Leo ran back to join Jamal's children, Rachel stood up looking out over her magnificent estate. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden glow over the stone patio, the shimmering lake, and the incredible life she had fought so fiercely to secure. She had spent a decade shrinking herself, contorting her ambition, and muting her immense intelligence to fit into the suffocating narrow box Jason and his elite family had built for her. She had endured the casual cruelty, the vicious financial manipulation, and the relentless, exhausting gaslighting. But they had made a fatal, catastrophic miscalculation. They assumed her quiet demeanor was weakness. They mistook her patience for submission. They genuinely thought they could break her down, steal her hard work, and leave her with absolutely nothing. Instead, they handed her the exact blueprints to their own destruction. She took the heavy stones they threw at her and used them to lay the unshakable foundation of an impenetrable fortress. She had reclaimed her power, secured her son's future, and seized absolute control of the empire they had tried to lock her out of. She was no longer the quiet, agreeable wife balancing spreadsheets in the shadows. She was the architect of her own destiny, a titan in her own right, standing firmly at the absolute pinnacle of the life she had rightfully earned. Never let anyone dictate your worth. Never apologize for demanding exactly what you are owed. And never ever let someone convince you that you are small simply because they are intimidated by your true size. Sometimes the trash takes itself out, but when it asks to split the bills before it leaves, make sure you charge it for the cleanup. The ultimate lesson from this narrative of sweet revenge is that true power lies in quiet resilience and knowing your own unwavering worth. For years, the protagonist endured emotional manipulation and financial abuse, consistently underestimated by toxic family members who mistook her patience for weakness. Instead of reacting impulsively to their public humiliations, she strategically channeled her energy into building an unbreakable foundation of independence. She proves that the greatest response to cruelty isn't loud retaliation, but completely outgrowing the people who tried to keep you small. Reclaim your power, share your own story of overcoming toxic relationships, and comment below.